It's been a while since I've done this. Where's the button even?
But I mean, you definitely got a more professional setup there that I can see from the last time.
Because I got like a table and stuff.
Right.
Yeah, well, I kind of like that feeling. I've seen, well, not it's more live streams and podcasts, but where they're further back from the camera and they lean back in their chair, and it just seems more comfortable. So I wanted to have candlelight and a reclining chair and all kinds of things, but it didn't happen. So first of all, I was actually, there is one little thing. This may not work, but this is a particular. Okay, you can get there. It's on both cameras. I think maybe a little bigger would be good, but anyways, it actually works pretty well. I think bigger, maybe put me on the table-y thing, the shelves behind you, or on a little table. That would be good. Yeah, something bigger. Anyways, I thought this conversation went pretty well. I don't have much to say. We both enjoyed it, and hopefully we'll do something else together. This little television. And we'll see if it works. What I thought it would be neat to do, I'm trying to find some interesting things, is it's got a green screen on it, right?
Mm-hmm.
So if I can pull it off, I've experimented with this. I'll pause the video in the edit and I'll project a message from me into saying how I felt about the video now that it's done. But I'll put it people. Anyways, it's just fooling around. I get caught up with gimmicks, so we'll find out if it's a bad idea or a good idea.
Well, yeah, I totally support the experimenting of those different things, because then you find your quirks, your character, your voice. You know, what makes something particularly you, and that's what sets you apart. It doesn't have to be anything spectacular. It's just character. You know, that's
right. And it's weird to experiment with videoing and presenting your character, but there's no way around that being what's going to work with YouTube. And yeah, I'd had that specifically. I was feeling particularly from the last video I did, where I felt that I wasn't as ready to answer with my opinions because I was trying to be all neutral. And no, that's not the idea. The idea is to be as reasonably and politely and humbly honest as possible, really, without causing a complete disaster. So today you have the good fortune of getting the counterbalance, where I'm going to try to, if anything, go overboard in being relaxed.
Awesome.
I was wondering whether you did anything interesting for Christmas.
Christmas. So the last couple of years, my wife and I have gone to Disney World, specifically to Epcot, because they have the World Showcase area, which each individual country around the World Showcase has their own little mini shows demonstrating how they celebrate the New Year or celebrate Christmas. So we've always enjoyed going to see some of those shows and just eating some of the holiday foods around the World Showcase. And that's typically how we spend Christmas Day itself. And Christmas Eve is when we stay in and do all the cooking and eating our own stuff. And then the day after is nothing. Just
recovery.
Rest.
Yeah. I think more and more the eating your own stuff is for me the Christmassy part. I get the feeling that like religiously I'm not sure how to describe myself. Certainly nothing too organized. Very disorganized. So yeah, that's the way it's been for a while. It's hard for me. I just was sort of cluing into this the other day that. So, when was the last time you saw snow? I'm in Canada, right? We have snow right now. It fell yesterday.
Yeah. So the last time I saw snow now at this point will have been 4 years ago, that since we moved here in January of 2018. And when we moved here, I packed the truck when it was -10 in Ohio. And then we drove here and it was like 65 degrees when we got here the next day, which was really nice. But there was actually something that my wife and I have been talking about lately as far as holidays go. And I know this is totally off topic from what we might have come here to originally talk about. But this is something I would love to bounce off of you as somebody who lives up north. How much, first of all, quick question, how much have you traveled like much further down south in the warmer climes? Like, have you?
I have traveled a terribly small amount. I have not gone further. I am as far south as I've ever gone as it is now.
Okay.
I'm in the bottom of Ontario, so I'm actually more south than some of the states.
Wow. Okay.
And yeah, so I'm in the warm part of Canada apparently.
Yeah. So okay, so this is something that I would love to talk to you about, maybe briefly, real quick. Or maybe it'll turn into a much longer subject. So
Okay.
We
I'm thinking sorry. Maybe we
Nope, that's
should give
okay.
people some hint who we are and what we're talking about
This is true.
before we
All
just
right.
talk about whatever idle things we want.
Yeah, probably good. Yeah, so that we're not having to edit everything back
Yeah,
and
because I
forth. So
don't generally do that. Um,
no.
Anyways, I had a thought and I lost it. Oh yeah, I have switched. Originally, I was very pure. My title said nothing about what was going on in the conversation. I did
Mhm.
again Joe Rogan style. It's just this is episode number whatever. This is who I'm talking to. And then
Right.
especially starting out, who's going to watch this? If they don't know what it's about, I don't tend to
Yep.
talk to celebrities, so it's just not going to happen. So I've
Sure.
switched, but still, yeah. If we and maybe
Yeah.
I'll put this at the beginning. I don't know. But as far as I can tell, you've got we're talking for different reasons, but because I found your channel and you can do a better explanation of what your channel is than I can, because you got a pitch and everything. So
Yep. So I am Artemis. I have a channel on YouTube, and I've actually just recently uploaded to Rumble and Odyssey as well. The channel's called Tea Time with Artemis, and my tagline is a place where I muse about my gender transition experience, and in the process aim to comfort and inspire others to a greater level of self-awareness. So I aim to turn my transgender experience into more of something where people can be curious, and I can share these things and they can ask questions, and we can all, learn and be comfortable in that what might be an uncomfortable space for most people. So that is the goal anyway.
okay, and then for my part, I'm still trying to figure out what my channel's about, but the basic idea is it's a channel where, for the most part, it's not about telling people what to think. It's about figuring out, exploring different perspectives, including my own. It's about humbly and honestly saying what my feelings are in response to people that I find unusual, precisely because, in the spirit of what you're saying, I think awkward conversations can be, um, well, there's a great value in having conversations that would potentially be awkward that are not, and instead they're fun, they're curious. But yeah, I mean, I haven't practiced my blurb for a while, so that's the general idea. And then one of the things I'm really interested in is having recurrent conversations with people, and sometimes talking about whatever the specific thing is about their experience that I'm interested in, and sometimes just broadening it out or finding other things, and then adding a good dose of just conversational appeal if we can muster it, and perhaps a certain amount of disagreeing nicely if we can find something to
Right.
agree about. Anyways, okay, so you were telling me, I forget. Oh, asked how far down south I'd been, and the answer is not. Um,
Yes.
which
So, as far as talking about snow and perhaps holiday season celebrations, and I have looked into the origins of things like Yule and Christmas, and I don't know, in other Northern European countries they have different names for it, but essentially from what I understand, they're all celebrations that were aimed to bringing people together, bringing some sort of cheer and boosting of the morale, typically when the weather is kind of cruddy and, it's supposed to be a dark, dreary time when resources might be, less abundant. So it's a way to, like I said, boost the morale. And that is entirely dependent. These all of these celebrations are entirely dependent on having a outdoor environment that is harsh and threatening. And so we've noticed since we've been here in Florida, where that's not the case, unless it's in the middle of summer where it's just god awful hot. We've had a really hard time getting into the kind of Christmas feel. And a lot of people will say, oh, it's because, you don't have snow, but it goes beyond that. And it goes so much to the point that, we came here to kind of escape some of that cruddier weather, that gray everyday sort of feel for a good chunk of the year. But we find ourselves craving that shitty weather again for the holiday traditions. And that sounds, to me, when I think about it, that sounds so twisted and so perverse, because you're like, you came here to get away from that, and now you're craving that edge of danger and depression and just total, so that you can have that happy celebration. It's like it's just a very, very weird inversion of the spirit of the holiday, I
yeah,
guess,
no,
kind
that's
of thing.
really interesting. That actually connects a lot with what I've been thinking about in terms of setting up an environment for myself where I function well, as opposed to one that is comfortable and easy, where I just do terribly. Um,
Right. Right.
and actually, I something I'd like to talk to you about, assuming I have this correct, is you made some reference in our past conversations to going hunting. Is that right?
Yep. Yep.
Is that
Yep.
something you do currently or sometimes?
Currently, no. No, I have not had the opportunity, and I've leaned away from that a little bit more because it's I guess for a while there I had to try to find this happy balance. This is a whole nother conversation, a whole nother can of worms.
Oh,
So
okay.
maybe
So I'd like
I'll
to get into it maybe a
pause
bit
there, but
later. I just wanted
yeah,
to see that I was on the right track there because to me
yes, you
they
are.
do
Yep.
kind of mix, like the idea of living in a more primitive way from my
Yeah.
point of view also connects with living in a more where you just do more stuff yourself and where, if I'm going to
Right.
eat meat then I better have killed it, that kind of thing. So that's on my list. So we will get back to that unless we just
Yep.
fall
Good.
asleep or
Cool.
something. Yeah, so that's and all that. Yeah, the business about the harsh conditions, that makes perfect sense. But before I brought you a gift.
Oh yeah.
So
Okay.
since you've
Little
4 years and no snow,
little bit of
I
snow.
brought you
Aw.
some snow.
Awesome. Thank
And I
you.
don't know if I brought if I can make you a snowman
Little
while we
snowball.
talk
Yeah.
or
Oh,
not.
cool. That's
I thought it
awesome.
would be neat if I could make it like a transgender snowman, but I think that might be inappropriate for YouTube.
I would love to know what that would look like.
Well, I don't think my snow skills are good enough to get like the pre-op, post-op type stuff. And I'm not going to explain to people what that is. They can Google it.
They can
Um,
Google it. Yep.
um,
That's awesome. Love it.
it's not starting to look like a robot to me. But so there's.
I get.
No, I don't have a lot of take.
They don't put him under the light; he'll melt.
I'm gonna stick it there for now. But it's not even in my.
I was gonna say I can see it, but
I just realized my video that I'm doing with my secondary camera doesn't even show most of the table. That's terrible.
oh jeez.
Okay, so there's a snowman there.
There we
Or
go.
it's a snow person, I should say.
Yep. Yep. Yeah, I was gonna say, be careful you don't misgender that snowman.
Well, especially this one, like this
Snow
one
person.
special. Okay. So, what on earth do I want to start with? Well, I'll tell you the things that I've got on my list, and you can tell me what grabs you, maybe if anything does. Okay, one thing I wanted to
I
start
was
with.
gonna say before you continue, if there's anything more that you have to add to that, the whole idea of needing the terrible weather in order to celebrate, the joyous, happy holiday, and without that, it's like you can have the great weather and you can have, the good feeling all year round, or you can have the really crappy weather just to have this super meaningful, joyous holiday celebration. If you have any more thoughts on that, I'd be curious.
Yeah. Oh, I definitely do. So yeah, if you want, we can actually start with that. We can start with
Yeah.
like the whole hunting, and we'll see how hunting fits in.
Yeah.
I've recently had the opportunity to kill a whole bunch of poultry, so I'm thinking that kind of thing's on my mind.
Yeah, I would imagine. Yes, death will do that to you.
Which I was looking forward to after a fashion. But anyway,
Yeah.
yeah. Well, let me think. I haven't arranged my thoughts on this, but you were talking about it in the context of to enjoy sort of these aren't the best words, but to enjoy a decadent time of year or to enjoy a festive, whatever, that you want to have something to contrast it with.
Right.
And that's certainly something I have felt. I've had the opportunity to have a fairly unstructured periods of my life, and I have not necessarily made use of that. I've actually thought that a more harsh environment would be desirable. And it seems to me that the more we have control over our environment, the more it means that everything's like a diet. You have freedom. You get to choose, but you have to choose what's healthy for you, and you don't necessarily instinctively do it. Some people do.
Right.
So it actually means that it's putting more and more pressure for me on willpower and thinking and feeling around and introspecting to choose what to do, which does not seem like the right thing to do. And so that actually, like my approach, and I have not tested this, but I'm going to do it this winter, I hope, to health and dieting and fitness is, okay, so I want to be in an environment where I just don't have food lying around, because if there's food lying around, I'm going to eat it.
Yep.
And
Yep.
I've so far gotten away with that pretty much. But
That scene
I'm
from The Grinch, the most recent Grinch movie with Jim Carrey, where he's, "Am I eating because I'm bored?" is absolutely something that I say to myself every time I'm standing awkwardly in front of the pantry or having opened the fridge door looking for something to eat, because that's precisely what's happening. Is like what you said, just the abundance without the willpower to
yeah,
stop it.
and it's easy, and certainly I have thought this in the past, to think that choice is better than lack of choice, and lack of choice sounds like it's bad, as opposed to it's freeing because I don't have to think. Um, and I'm going to see if I can just avoid all the things that are bad habits for me by not having electric light,
Mhm.
not having electricity, period, and not so that takes out computers, that takes out like in the evening, rather than trying to
Mhm.
stay off them, by not having food around because I'm going to be camping out on a family property, not have, and
Mhm.
then walking to get to food or something like
Yep.
that. Like I'm
Yep.
hoping
Yeah.
it looks like I should be able to do it at least somewhat. And yeah, that whole I grew up off the grid. Okay, I didn't grow up
Mhm.
like the first half of like up till the age of 12 or so, and wood heat, candlelight, and I've gotten
Mhm.
progressively sicker as I've gotten further away from that, and I wonder how much that has to do with it. I don't mean like
Yeah.
sick that you'd notice, but I just mean like feeling less good and just,
Lethargic.
well, I'm pretty hyper actually, so I wouldn't say lethargic, but I'd just
Okay.
say like just either not enjoying things, little health problems, like just ugh.
Yeah.
And yeah, so I'm curious to see, but to me, it's exciting and freeing, and my
Mhm.
experience has been that it's not deprivation, as in, oh, I can't eat Cheetos. It's I don't even think of it. It's just gone.
Right. Yep.
Um,
Yeah. And that, oh, go ahead if you had any more to
no,
add
I
to
was just
that.
making noise.
Yeah, no, there's absolutely, and that ties into so many things that I've been seeing as of late. Where, oh gosh, so there's this advertisement on YouTube that I've been seeing lately for something called The Project, and I don't know how widespread this is, but it seems to me that they're advertising to men who have, like you, seem to have lost that touch with that inner sense of, oh gosh, struggle. I don't know
Hmm.
if that's really the right word, but to actually feel like you've made some kind of difference and headway. Usually men or masculine people have to really physically manipulate their surroundings, and there has to be a degree of suffering in that, which sounds kind of twisted. And when there's not that involved, you kind of feel listless and without purpose, and like you're missing something. So in this advertisement, it's basically looks like a cross between a military boot camp and like a leadership kind of conference, where these guys are all coming together to physically struggle for some kind of goal completion, and to kind of learn to reconnect back with that very primal, visceral aspect of themselves, which is something that as we move forward in this digital age, I feel like people are getting further and further away from that. And like you touched on it beautifully when you said sick, just sick. And it's not like, a physical, sniffles, cough kind of thing. It's more of a mental, because we're detaching from the things that, from the evolutionary biology standpoint, we just have in our DNA to be able to 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 cope with day-to-day life, and more than just cope, and more than just survive. It's thriving, which seems to be kind of opposite to what people think, that thriving would be not having to worry about food and water and shelter on a day-to-day basis. And while to some degree that's true, when you don't balance that very fine line between survival and just surviving, and then that excess of material, like you said, it manifests in just feeling kind of in so many other ways. And I don't think people can put their finger on it, because the last thing that they're thinking of is, I think I need some suffering today to feel like my life has meaning. So
Hmm.
it's but that's, I feel like that's kind of what you're saying. At least that's what it sounds like to
Yeah,
me,
yeah.
and I'm seeing people trying to get back to that, in so many ways, reconnecting with nature, even as cliche as that sounds, reconnecting with those survival type elements. I think that's really what it boils down to, is that little bit of danger, that edge of danger. And it's so screwed up to say that it seems like humans need some form of suffering, even though we're constantly trying to fight it off. Even in mental therapy, they say people are trying to avoid the pain of some of these emotions, but the solution in overcoming them is to actually face that emotion, face the pain, face the fear, and move your way through that emotion, experience it, and come out the other side. So that was a huge thing to try to tie things all together. But to me, like that big picture, it's all the pieces are all connected. So
Yeah. Oh, yeah. I think it does. At least for me, I would think it would reach into all sorts of things.
mm,
And yeah, as I said, I don't feel like I've got the wherewithal to pull together too many thoughts about it. But that's certainly the general idea. And
yeah.
so you say it's been a while since you've done any hunting. What hunting did you do in the past?
Yeah, so to tie that in, my dad, when I was, oh gosh, maybe when I was 14 or 15, bought me my first shotgun, and we went. He took me to go hunting with all the guys down at the cabin, out in the middle of the woods in southern Ohio, where they all went. And it was actually kind of courageous on his part, because no technically biological female had ever been a part of this group of men before. It was very friends of my grandfather's who, with their bare hands, built a cabin in the middle of the woods, pot-bellied stove and no electricity. And it was okay. You kill the deer, you dress the deer, you eat whatever in the cabin, and you bring Goldschlager or whatever drinks, and you get drunk the night before, and you go out the next morning, you go hunting. It was pull your ass out of bed and go do something productive. And I was the first female at the time still presenting as such, because like I said, 14, 15 years old, and I didn't transition until I was 31. So still very much presenting female, going to this camp hunting deer. Whitetail deer was what we would do. And it was very, survival ritual, get away from everything kind of experience. And I definitely would like to do that now that I feel like I've properly processed my position on the killing and consuming of animals. I've had to work my way through that, because you get people out there, no, you can be a vegan, you don't need meat as a human. I don't believe that at all. I think some people's metabolisms do better as vegans, and they can get away with that, but I don't think the average human diet should completely lack meat. That's my personal opinion. But I had to kind of come to terms with that for myself, and go through all of the, okay, I'm killing something for my survival, not just to kill it. And I'm going to be appreciative of this very ritualistic thing, that it's not to be taken for granted. And it's certainly not, I don't delight in the killing of anything itself, certainly. And I still don't like the idea of having to kill anything. But like I said, I feel like it's just one of those necessary cycles for the vast majority of people here on this planet, if you want to talk about spiritual sense. So I have not been hunting in a while, because I had to go through all of that process and thinking and growing up and maturing kind of thing. But if given the opportunity now, as that kind of experience, a ritual of going out and doing the unplugging from all of whatever this is, and getting back to nature, and doing the hunting for survival kind of thing, I would definitely do that periodically if I could. But I don't have any of my hunting supplies, and really no means or place to go hunting, because up north is pretty much, I think, where I would prefer to do it, because it's just too damn hot down here. And it's just not as enjoyable for me. But there's plenty of guys that love to do the, mm, warm weather whitetail hunting in, Texas or Georgia or whatever, but it's just not my thing. So
So for how long did you hunt, and how much? I'm just trying to get a sense of your
um,
experience
I,
with it.
I went every year for probably from 14 to maybe 19. So for about 5 years, I went with my dad.
Okay. I
So
guess partly I recall from our previous conversation you mentioned going and maybe getting a new bow or a fixed bow or something. So the reference to the bow made me think it was more recent, but I take it you weren't
yeah.
actually shooting that at anybody at that point.
No, yeah, no, I do have a compound bow. I think a recurve would probably be more fair, because that you can't, sit there and hold it. And certainly I don't really like the idea of crossbows because that's just, gun hunting with a bolt. So yeah, your range is limited, but I don't think it requires any kind of skill whatsoever to go crossbow hunting, but or maybe even gun hunting for that matter. But yeah, I do have a compound bow, but I've not actually killed anything with it. Each time I went hunting with my dad, it was always a shotgun or a muzzle loader season. So, are you familiar with muzzle loading
I'm not
weapons?
familiar with any firearms. I know a bit about
Okay.
bows, like every bow you've mentioned. I know roughly what it looks like
Yeah.
recurve and compound. But yeah,
Yeah. A shotgun is just something that you put a preloaded,
okay, I know a
shell
shotgun
with
from
powder and
movies.
everything.
Yeah,
And then a muzzle loader is, as the name implies, you are putting the powder in, the packing the powder, and then it's powder packing bullet. And then, ramming that down the barrel, and then you use like a flint or a percussion cap or something to light the gunpowder. So
I feel
it's
like
a
this
one
gun should have
shot.
a bayonet on the end.
Yes, that's
Like, just
essentially,
how
yeah,
far
and that's
back are
modern
we?
versions.
So you
But
have more of an interest in like older
yeah, yeah, because
weapons.
there's even more of a chance that the thing that you're hunting has a fair shake. But yeah, it's interesting to say the least. And they do the muzzle loading season, so with shotgun you can load up multiple shots and take multiple shots at something in order to ensure that you've killed it. But as far as a muzzle loader goes, it's one shot and you're done. And so they have a short shotgun season, which is usually 1 week. Like in Ohio, it was 1 week you were allowed to use a shotgun, and then they would have another weekend later in the season where you could use muzzle loader only. So it would decrease the likelihood of you potentially getting something, to give again the deer more of a fair shake and not reduce the population by too much, but to give another season for the hunters who might be interested in something other than shotguns. So yeah, I did both shotgun and muzzle loader usually every year for 5 years. So
Do you know why your dad got you into it? It's not. Were you interested, or did he think it was good for you, or?
I expressed interest. Yeah, he was mildly reluctant, because my dad is, I mean, me and two younger sisters. I'm not saying he is very old fashioned, but there's definitely that sort of, is it okay for girls with that kind of thing? Like, should I be encouraging that? Is that going to, in some way harm what I think would be best for them, kind of thing? But yeah, I expressed interest in wanting to go. So away I went. And I remember very specifically, we used um, stands, tree climbing stands that you carried into the field, and you would set them up, put them around the tree, and then use them like the old lumberjacks where you jack it in, stand up on it, grab this, pull up, jack it in, pull up. And so it's not something that is for the faint of heart or the faint of muscle, for that matter. But at the time, being all of 120 pounds soaking wet, I just remember doing that in front of all of these guys, and they were just slack-jawed, flabbergasted that I didn't want any help. Everything I took on my back, I carried. I didn't care if it was 50, 60 pounds with the gun and everything else. I went in and I went out by myself, no problem. And I just remember them being just stunned. And now I understand why, because it's not exactly typical for female behavior, but it makes sense now looking back on it, why I was okay with that, why I wanted to do it. So
I don't recall talking about what other were there other sports or anything else activities at the time you were involved in? Just
the
just that
typical.
isn't easy for anyone. I don't think I haven't done it, but it doesn't sound particularly effortless.
No, no, it is not. It's a lot of hard work. And then, also in these mountains where we were hunting, typically when you shoot a deer, if you don't drop it, it heads downhill. So if you don't have a four-wheeler, you're, hauling that 150-pound thing or 200-pound thing up the hill by hand, to get to a place where the four-wheelers can reach, so it's not fun. But yeah, it's a lot of work. And there were other sports. Yeah. Typical, lesbian sports. I did play softball. I was definitely into that.
That's a
So,
lesbian sport. I've
oh
never
my,
heard.
yeah, the jokes abound about, lesbians playing softball. But yeah, that was the major one that I participated in. So
Okay. So did you enjoy? You did year to year. That was because you liked doing it.
yeah, oh yeah, loved it.
But at the same time, you say you've never enjoyed killing anything. So
No, the experience was more just being being up in a tree stand as the sun's coming up or as the sun's going down. It's an incredibly peaceful experience. Even if you're not hunting, something that I would recommend to the vast majority of people, because you're up in a perspective that only animals get to see. And if you're sitting there quiet enough, observing, the passing of time, you can actually begin to see the wildlife around you kind of doing its thing. And it's almost like a live documentary, essentially. And I don't know, it's being out in the middle of nowhere too. It's just something that's very peaceful about it, and very easy to fall asleep in that tree stand. Plenty of stories about, the guys that would share, waking up and there's a deer sitting in front of them, and they'd fallen asleep in the tree stand trying to very, very quietly maneuver their weapon to take aim, because they completely were taken unaware, falling asleep in the tree stand, because it's just that nice. But yeah.
Um, yeah, going back to the method of killing is something I've thought of. I'd come out of well, I haven't hunted. All I've done is attempt, or mostly successfully, to decapitate turkeys and chickens. And what the thing is there, my focus is on making it as quick and hopefully painless and
Right.
unalarming as possible. And then I think
Right.
of hunting, and I think, isn't the idea to hit them and then they run around bleeding?
No.
No.
And actually, let me go back a little bit to that. So yeah, the enjoyment for me is being out in nature, and then also the stalking part. So there's something very, very primal, predatory, that gets kind of, the hair on the back of your neck stands up, because what you're there to do, and that animal doesn't see you yet. There's something very, very, and it sounds sick, and I don't, not something that I delight in, but it is absolutely something that, if you're hunting something, if you have that within you, it's just a switch that kind of gets triggered. But, the actual act of, knowing that, bullets left the gun, it's hit the target, and that animal is, done, whether it's, dropped right where you shot it, and it's, going through the spasms, or, just in the death throes. That part, all of that part is horrible. I don't like that aspect of it at all. In fact, if I could just, snap my fingers and make it all end immediately, quickly, painlessly, I would much prefer to do that. But the goal of any ethical hunter is to drop that animal where it stood when you shot it. So there are certainly things to keep in mind, like making sure that you have a clear shot, steady shot, you're using the right ammunition at the right distance, and only taking that shot when you can be reasonably sure that it's going to end quickly and painlessly. Following a blood trail is something you don't want to have to do. But a lot of these animals are so incredibly resilient that, you'd be amazed at the things that they can push past, seemingly, when they're already dead, essentially, but their body just keeps going.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, no, that is definitely not the goal at all, to have to follow something to find wherever it falls.
So what's the fastest death you've seen?
I've shot a deer that literally dropped right where I shot it, which was nice.
Does that have
I
to be
was
a head?
sitting.
Does that have to be a
No,
headshot, or?
no. So the ammunition that you use can play a part too. So what you want to use, hollow point ammunition. So basically, once it enters the body, it
Oh, does it?
essentially is a mini explosion. Yeah. And so the shock, and then, basically, yeah, it sends them into a shock, and then they die very shortly after. But no, you don't have to have a headshot. And oftentimes that's not what you want to aim for, because most of us aren't all that good. And if you miss in any way, that's a terrible injury for that animal to suffer. So Yeah, you're usually going for the heart.
Okay. The finishing bit of what I was saying about chickens versus hunting
Yeah.
is that
Mhm.
it seems to me the less fair it is. Like there is that I have that feeling too. If I want to make it fair, like can I even make it where I have this idea like jumping out of a tree onto a deer and with a knife or something. Well, that's a terrible
Right.
way for the deer to go.
Right.
So there seems to be a. I'm glad to hear what you said about hunting. I mean about shooting them. That it's that can be that effective.
Yeah.
But I think there is a point where actually making it more unnatural and unfair is more ethical, which I don't know what to do about that in some ways.
Yeah. So expand more on that. You said
Oh,
say that
well,
one more time.
partly it's based on apparently a misunderstanding of mine, but just that,
Mhm.
like, if let's say what's more fair and feels more right and natural is that I hunt a deer with a pocket knife. Well, that's not very
Mm,
ethical. So there's
correct.
actually a
Yeah.
level of technology that makes it more ethical. But and I
Yeah.
might actually maybe I don't know if this is correct, feel more guilt about using the higher level of technology,
Mm,
but it's actually more ethical. So that's seems like it might be a conflict. This is all stuff I'd like to try to work through. Um,
right. Yeah,
but
and that's something that we keep this whole appeal to tradition, in the sense that going back to the old way of doing something, that we have this, I think, romantic idea that that is somehow the better way or the best way to do something. But there can be this very happy marriage between tradition and technology, where it's kind of the best of both worlds, where it's both ethical and fair, in as much as it we can make it ethical, if that makes sense.
like you shoot it with a bow and arrow, and if that doesn't work, then you gun it down with a machine gun.
Right. Right. So the bows, though, I don't know if you had much experience with the technology in bows, especially with compound bows, or if you're strong enough to use a recurve with a really heavy draw weight, which for me, because of my small size and stature, I probably, in order to be ethical, would have to use a compound instead of a recurve. Compound bows make it so that you can have a very heavy draw weight, so that arrow moves very, very quickly, and your broadheads can be made of such a shape and sharpness that it happens all the time that the arrows pass straight through the deer. Because they're traveling at such speed and they're so sharp. And that is something that, unfortunately, when you're hunting with bow and arrow, that is often where you will get to some degree, a blood trail that you will follow, because it doesn't explode. It just tears through the animal with surgical precision, and it causes massive hemorrhaging within a short period of time. But there is a blood trail that you're going to follow, anywhere from 50 to 150 or 200 yards even. So it just depends how quick that animal's moving and what the terrain looks like. So yeah, that's one of those areas where you can kind of maybe murky territory as to whether or not the bow and arrow is the most ethical. But the season for shotgun for a lot of people is also much shorter than it is for bow and arrow. Bow and arrow is usually season lasts from like September. You can do it all the way through the end of the year. So it's a longer season to be able to hunt more, which is oftentimes why people will do bow and arrow instead of gun only, because it increases their hunting season, legal hunting season.
Right. So what? It's a longer season just to give them a chance to actually hit something.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So
Yeah. The fact that you can get it wrong and just give them a horrible injury, and worse, still
mhm.
worse than, like, at least with a farm animal, it's pretty much my prisoner. So I
Yeah.
can whatever I can attempt to correct whatever I've done.
Right.
They can just run away if you have injured them, which is not, I mean, like the idea of say a deer running with an arrow stuck in it for who knows how long, like
Yeah.
days. Ugh.
Yeah. 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 It can be an absolutely nasty thing. And it's something that I think you just kind of you have to accept as a possibility, much like, I don't know, hitting a deer with a car. If it gets up and runs off, it might die of internal injury later, but that's not something that you can do much about. It's just something, unfortunately, that happens as a byproduct of interaction with the world, which in the world is inherent suffering. So, I mean, you get into that philosophical argument very quickly, that you can argue both ways. And I'm not saying that either way is correct or incorrect.
Yeah. increasingly, I think that part of the answer to that problem, I think you see that variations of that problem of basically you are going to cause suffering.
Right.
And the only answer I've come up with is so I better make sure what I'm doing is as worthwhile as I can make it, which is to me blows apart like most of Western civilization at this point is pretty
Yeah.
decadent. Um,
Yeah.
and so I had this thought just cutting the grass actually, where just I think just the imagining the destruction at like a bug's eye level of what I'm doing. Never mind even whether you care or give any concern for the small wildlife.
Yep.
Just on a destruction level, it seems so
Yep.
atrocious if you imagine at that
Hmm.
level. And all I could come up with was, well, so I have to make it worthwhile,
Yep. Yep.
and
Yep.
that's
And
just
that's
what's going on.
hilarious. You could usually mention that. Yeah, I think people aren't thinking on that, real wide picture level most of the time. We tend to be pretty myopic, and we have to be, because if we cared about all of those things on all those levels, we'd so much anxiety, we'd lose our minds. And that's kind of the job of the brain, at least what I've heard other people say, is that it acts like a throttle. It's there to kind of,
Yeah.
bring in the focus. Yeah. And I've had that very same thought mowing the lawn. I don't like living in neighborhoods anymore for a number of reasons, not the least of which is that you have to keep up on this fake grass, fake lawn, for everybody to. And I understand you want it to look nice so that property values don't decrease and that it, yada 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 yada. I understand that. I just don't fit into that model, because wherever I would like to find myself living next, if it's something that I would be living permanently, would be a place where it's in the forest, where everything is pretty much very, very natural. There's no lawn. If we have any of that, it'll be moss instead, which is just naturally propagating. You don't have to do anything to it. It's more eco-friendly. And I kind of just like that aesthetic anyway. I don't really like the idea of having to take, gas powered or even battery powered power tools to everything to keep nature at bay, because I don't necessarily want to keep nature at bay to that extreme degree of, immaculate. Oh gosh, Peterson would probably call it, high on the neurotic level of
Oh,
order.
yeah.
I don't necessarily want that anymore. And like you said, there's a lot of destruction involved in it. For what exactly? And I don't want much to do with it anymore personally. But
Mhm.
forget exactly where I was going with that. But anyway, along those lines, I
Yeah.
to
Yeah.
say I understand.
Yeah. Yeah. I'm just gonna check to make sure my snowman isn't good. I don't have
Yeah,
a
he's
puddle here.
looking a
No, that's
little.
good.
Yeah,
Yeah, I can
he's
put.
he's got a gangster lean going on right now.
Yeah.
But
I should have brought some twigs. It actually turned out, at least if I use an imagination, it looked pretty good. I don't know that it actually does objectively, but
yeah, I enjoy it thoroughly.
good, good. Maybe if I remember at the end, I can do a zoom in just on it or something.
Hmm.
Um,
What's left of him?
yeah,
A time lapse.
yeah. This is how we know how far we're going. Actually, that would be a funny
There you
edit to
go.
do, like cutting
Kind of like an
between.
hourglass. Yeah.
Yeah, like different shots. It shows one of us droning on, and it shows.
Yeah.
Um, yeah. So there's something I wanted to pick up on. Okay, I have to figure out how I want to do this. Whether we want to have an intense, we talked about doing a sort of intense, um, taboo questions kind of section. Although I
Yeah.
also that's the sort of thing I've daydreamed of since I started the podcast, or even before.
Right.
The only thing is I also like sprinkling them in naturally.
Yeah.
But there was something I'm curious about because I have the feeling in the past you mentioned, and I didn't pick up on this, that it's hard to say what's common. I'm really careful now about what I presume to be what most people of a particular group think, because I don't think that I know, and I don't think other people who think they know necessarily. But
Right.
one might have the impression that uh, people who consider themselves to be transsexual or transgender do not want to talk about their original birth names. And there certainly is a
Mm,
culture of, they call it dead naming, which, no
right.
offense to those who care, but sounds dramatic to me. Um,
Right.
I mean, I can to some degree fathom what that is. If I imagine if I was trying to get away from I talk about how being sicker as I get a more technological and natural life. If I imagine that I successfully extracted myself from a whole bunch of stuff that I didn't even know was a problem until I got away from it, and finally I put it behind me. If part of that had to do with moving and coming up with a different name and getting out of an abusive relationship or whatever, I can imagine, maybe not wanting to bring it up. So
Sure.
that's my attempt to understand that to some degree. But anyways, I believe you've said that you have no real problem with, like, you don't, that isn't a concern for you. And so I felt like that was an invitation to ask you what your original name was, and I never did. So if that I read that correctly, I'm curious, although it's certainly not crucial information.
Sure. Yeah. No, it's super feminine. It was Alyssa.
Okay. I was trying to
And
figure out what it might be because you'd said something about it being particularly girly or something. So I was thinking, okay, what's it gonna be? Yeah. You have frozen. I can't hear you either. Okay. If you can hear me,
there you go.
oh, you're back.
There you go. We're back. Yep. Sometimes the internet glitches out over here. So anyway,
Right. Yeah.
Continue.
Okay. Yeah. So feminine. Okay. Alyssa. Okay. And then the other thing is another invitation I dropped is you said that that your new name, Artemis, you thought might be a conversation starter. And so I looked up the name Artemis to try and figure out what the mythology was and what the deal was with it. And you've frozen again. Oh, you're back again.
There you go. Okay. Cool.
It might be, I'm hoping it isn't someone else in the house using the internet here. We'll see.
Yeah. Yeah. Was there anything else you wanted to say before I added to that?
I don't think so.
Okay. So you talked, this ties into what we talked about just a little bit ago with embracing embracing the cringe, embracing the fear or the upset that you feel about something. And this is, like you said, dead naming. It's very dramatic. And as you said, it seems like people are trying to distance themselves and run away from, not face any of that. And like you said, to a degree, can understand not wanting to continuously, relive it. But on the same token, part of what is kind of crucial as far as like if you go do therapy for something, you're the idea of therapy is to eventually feel comfortable moving past something. You have a problem, and it's not just I want to consistently talk about it and never get anywhere. The idea is to move through it somehow. And I feel like people who are using the dead naming as a way to, don't make me face this. I don't want to have to deal with this. Don't confront me with it. They're fragmenting themselves on an identity level, and they're creating pieces of themselves. This is kind of on a psychological scale here. They're creating pieces of themselves that are precisely the term skeletons in the closet, that if you do not reintegrate those back into yourself, it becomes very heavy baggage that just you're running away from and continues to bog you down. And eventually it's going to cause a major breakdown, a major problem. You can't just keep running away from something. So I don't certainly don't endorse people just willy-nilly saying, oh, I'm going to use your old name because I feel like it. That's not what I'm saying. I'm saying that if you have unresolved tension about being confronted with, or questions about that prior identity that you have, then that to me is cue that you have something that you need to work through on that. So I don't think there should be discomfort in talking about that, because we all have things in our past that we were at the time ignorant in being able to deal with or make better choices or decisions on. And we kind of have to resolve that as we move through life and make peace with that, or else it's just going to continue to eat you alive. So I don't want people using my old name because it doesn't really fit me, I don't think, anymore. But on the same token, I don't get uncomfortable about it because I've fully integrated, all of that prior life and identity into who I am today. So if that makes sense.
Yeah, no, it makes perfect sense. There's some interesting visualizations came to mind as you were saying it, like a timeline of someone's life and sort of chunks of them left behind that they hadn't,
Yep.
and that they have to actually go back and get them and piece them together and do something with them. It also makes me think of something else I wanted to talk about, which is that one of the ongoing things I'm trying to figure out is how to feel about, think about, and interact with people who have undergone some stages of transition.
Mhm.
And I'm trying to, on the one hand, be, polite and agreeable and civilized and all that, and on the other hand, honest, both in terms of my understanding of reality where it matters. Like, I don't have to
Right.
tell everybody my opinion on what reality is every minute, and at the
Mhm.
same time also be, when appropriate, take into account my feelings when they may not necessarily have it may not be a right or wrong answer necessarily, or an obvious reality based thing. It's not like, what someone's fundamentally what their sex is. That's what you could say is, a fact. It could be
Right.
how I see them, which might even change over the course of knowing them or something. So
Mhm.
something like
Mhm.
that, where seems to me, again, I don't know. It's hard to make any grand statements about what current opinion is, because I don't know if there is current opinion. There's just a mess out there, and I can focus on
Right.
different bits of it. But it seems like generally things, like so many issues, it's either one extreme or the other. And I'm trying to figure what to do in the middle of that. And what I've come up with so far is, personally, I feel the most comfortable, generally, not always, when I view people, such as you, for example, as a genuine hybrid, and I don't try to block anything out.
Right.
Um, Partly because, it's like any relationship where you block out some response or feeling. Like, I think you want to involve within reason as much as you can and make it as
Mhm.
natural as possible. Um,
Right.
so, if someone's going on and you think they're boring, it's nice if you can say, oh, we talked about that yesterday, could we try something new?
Yeah.
And if you can
Yeah.
do it nicely and
With tact. Yeah.
gracefully, well, or
Yeah.
not, like, if you've got siblings, you don't have to be tactful with them
Right.
necessarily, and that
Right.
can be part of the fun
Yeah.
mutually.
Yeah.
So, like, but if ideally, if you can keep doing it, then it is the most free and comfortable relationship. So that's my ideal.
Yeah.
um
Well, and
but
that's the ultimate show of intimacy, when you can be that honest with somebody, and that you realize that as we go through life, with the vast majority of people on our day-to-day interactions, we are kind of starved of that intimacy. And it's no wonder why people are so anxious, because they're not getting any kind of genuine connection with somebody. They're walking on, social eggshells, essentially.
so you think that is something which has increased,
The social anxiety aspect.
the anxiety,
Um,
walking on eggshells, dishonesty?
Especially because of this whole environment of, political correctness,
Right.
and added with the heavy focus on, narcissistic behavior that we now have in the culture, which is, yeah, everybody, focuses on me and it's all about me, but on my terms. You will you will interact with me as I want, because that is respectful of me, versus them being respectful of the way somebody else might want to, how they could be comfortable interacting with you. It's that whole external locus of control. I'm going to control you to regulate my sense of self and my emotions. There's no respect there. So I think it's compounding that problem of, we think that we're increasing intimacy, but we're not actually. It's completely perverse version of that, facilitated by the whole explosion of narcissistic behavior. So
Yeah, I guess that makes sense to me. I had a thought.
sorry to interrupt you on that.
Did you? I didn't think. I didn't think you did.
Okay.
Yeah. Okay. No, I know what I was going to say. So again, picking up loose ends from previous conversations, I don't recall exactly how I approached it, but I brought this up before, as far as how I see you,
Right.
and you very elegantly asked me how I would. Uh, I forget exactly how I would see you if I wasn't concerned about what you thought, something like that.
Hmm.
Um, but I want to turn that around and say, how would you like to be seen, either by me or anyone else? And
Mm. That's a good question. So and one that I've kind of always slipped away from because I'm always so interested in other people's, perspectives of me. That's it's like a social mirror for me to be able to see, okay, is that lining up with how I see myself? So I guess if you want to say, how do I see myself, that might be a better question, because I don't necessarily want anybody to see me a certain way. How I see myself, though, is actually, as you put it, more of a hybrid kind of situation. That I recognize a very, masculine energy in a lot of ways, but there's also a lot of balancing feminine features. I kind of see myself as a pretty balanced and integrated, have both masculine and feminine together. It's just my general expression, the way that I view the world and the way that I am happiest operating in it seems to be much more on the masculine scale. So yeah, it's when I still occasionally get people that ma'am me. It's very rare nowadays, and that only pronouns only feel funny to me because of how I think other people are seeing them and using them, and not, because of how I particularly feel about it anymore. So
So
I'm
do
not
you
sure I'm
mean
answering the
do you
question
mean
very
that
well.
if I'm to make a leap about what you just said, does
Yeah.
that mean that it would seem odd to you for someone to refer to you, say, as she or ma'am, because you think it's weird compared to how other people are seeing you? So it could look awkward to anyone else who's taking part, and also perhaps that it's jarring just because that's not what you're used to anymore.
Both. Yeah.
But you don't
Yeah.
think you actually care about it fundamentally.
No, not at all. No. Yeah, it's the anxiety that I get over pronouns is entirely social in the sense that, it's I'm concerning myself with what situations or scenarios that might precipitate, when interacting with that person, or, if they're interacting with me with other people who pronoun me differently, and then you have that. I've actually already had that happen before, where I've had people argue about which pronoun is the right one to use with me, and it was in a digital format, not in
Of
person, thank
course.
God. But I that whole situation, I was just, you it's not something that I've worked out a script on how to handle eloquently exactly. And anytime I encounter situations like that, my first response, and that's, maybe this is just me, my first response to anything that's either uncomfortable or very painful is to laugh. And I know that some people have found that, really upsetting or strange, but that's often how it comes off. And it's gotten me into trouble a couple of times, but it's not a situation that I've been able to navigate super eloquently just yet. So that's where my anxiety comes from, is when those two worlds might collide, and then I have to, navigate them. Because like you said, I remember in a prior interview, or asked me if I felt like I was lying or deceiving or a fraud, in that, people gender me as male, and that's not technically the biological truth. There are people in my life right now whom I've not had that conversation with, who see me very, very particularly as a biological male. And I know this because they've asked me, are you going to have kids? Are you going to, and talking about with my wife and everything. And, I don't get too much into the conversation very deeply. But on some level, I do wonder. So this gets into a somewhat of a tiny ethical tangent here that I was hoping to maybe talk to you
Good.
about on that subject, which is, the way in which somebody views, like if they were to discover the truth. So let's say I've got, some in my career right now, the current career that I have, some clients of mine whom I would consider, close friends at this point, but they assume that I'm male, and I have a concern about, one day if they were to ever be made aware of the truth, I feel like there's two major ways that people can respond to that. Either they're going to feel betrayed because they were not made privy to that particular detail, or they're going to feel sad or perhaps upset that I maybe didn't feel comfortable enough with them to share the truth, that maybe there was something that they did or the way that they were behaving that made me feel like I wasn't safe enough to divulge, that truth. And quite frankly, I do think that the people who would be offended or betrayed by that are, and this is a very strong thing to say, but I've thought my way around this a lot. The kind of people that would feel offended or betrayed are the kind of people that feel entitled to know things about you that really are kind of private and very, not something that really is anybody's business. And so I would tend to feel more perhaps better friends with somebody who would take the flip side of that coin, which is, oh gosh, now I feel terrible that maybe you didn't feel comfortable enough sharing something like that with me. Like they're not offended by that. Instead, they feel more empathetic, if that makes sense. So I, having thought about it from that perspective, I generally just don't want people to feel like it was something that they did. I'd like to spare them that terrible feeling. But for the people that feel offended or betrayed that I didn't give them that detail, to them I would kind of say, that really wasn't something that was any of your business anyway. You're not entitled to the information. So, on some level, I don't really care that you're offended by that. You never asked me anyway. So you just kind of assumed. And so that, like I said, that sounds like a pretty harsh position to take, but that's kind of where I've landed at this point on that whole, do you feel deceitful argument.
Yeah, well, it's interesting, that example. I'm trying to figure out while you're talking how I might have fall into that, what sort of person I might be if I was in the situation of your clients. I honestly don't know. Like sometimes I am pretty good at getting offended by things. It might not seem like that, but and especially if it was something like, you didn't think that I could, that I would have been understanding or whatever, because I've got a fair bit of ego tied up in that. That's why I have a show about me being understanding.
Sure.
So but at the same time, I kind of would assume that people would not just tell me everything. I quite appreciate people not dumping everything. At least in theory, something I had as a blurb I could say going into this, which I figured wasn't necessary, but I kind of like, is something along the lines of, the personal sex related parts of this conversation are not my right, more my privilege and perhaps my obligation, since I have a podcast. But it's one thing to say that; it's another thing to fully feel it. So I don't know. I'd like to. I'm actually not sure. Maybe I'd be a mix, and then I'd argue with myself about which I should feel. That covers a lot of situations, actually.
Yeah, right. Yeah, it's something to think about, because I think it goes much deeper into that whole respecting of other people's autonomy and privacy, and not feeling entitled to some things, to those intimate details of somebody's life. And that again, that also speaks to the narcissistic entitlement. It's just one more, in my opinion, one more place that's an example of how that could manifest.
Yeah, I guess let's see if I can remember. I had two quick thoughts about that. One is that it probably just doesn't come up that much, right? Like, when would you tell someone? Like, it's pretty weird. And you don't want to tell people things that are private and that they aren't entitled to, as if you need to tell them for some weird reason. And that potentially makes it weirder. On the other hand, I can imagine if I was going to be offended about that sort of thing, I might think, weren't there situations where there was some conversation that came up where technically, based on what you said or didn't say, I correctly assumed that you were male, and so was there actually? I did actually have a situation like that. I don't want to go into it because it's somebody else's private details, but where I don't know for a fact what the conversations were that led me to have a particular understanding of something private about them. But it bothered me later, not that they necessarily didn't tell me or that it was different from what I thought, but that I wasn't sure if there was had been some actual deceit somewhere in there, and that was what bothered me. None of the rest of it did.
Exactly. And that actually it touches on so many things right there. The fact that buried deep in our DNA, in our genetics, is a mechanism to be able to detect when somebody is cheating, when somebody is deceitful. It's something that actually exists. People who have done studies on apes, that they are able to detect those kinds of things. It's buried deep in our brain, and that's for a survival mechanism. So when we are being deceived, it does trip that whole ego, embarrassment, rage, shame, all of those things. And all those things come up because they're all related to, in our brain, survival. But that's not it's misappropriated to this situation. And that's another perfect tie-in for the whole evolutionary biology. It's a place where people need to really get a grip on their emotions. Like, why am I feeling this? It's because of, okay, I'm feeling ashamed. I'm feeling, like I've been, somebody has been deceitful to me, but those things aren't actually true. And then, like you said, was I lied to directly? And that's why I'm very careful that in conversations where, if it comes to a point where I am going to have to tell a lie to get away with it, that's where I'm caught red-handed and I start to sweat, and I'm like, okay, I have to tell you this because I can't lie right here. And you'd be amazed at how much you can say, lie by omission, essentially, not actually saying something directly. You can skirt around that whole topic without saying anything that would indicate that you are one way or the other. And I've gotten very good at that at this point. Like, oh, aren't you guys going to have kids? No, it's just not something that is going to work for us, or we just don't feel like we're wanting to have children, which those things are very much true. It doesn't have to get into the nitty-gritty biological details, and I don't have to lie. But I have had scenarios where I've been caught red-handed, not in lying, but in a question where it was, I can't lie here. And it immediately in my head, I feel like that Who Wants to Be a Millionaire, where all the lights, dim down and there's a spotlight on you, and all of a sudden it's very intense, and I start to sweat, and they're wondering what the hell's wrong with me. And I'm like, okay, well, I got to be really honest with you here, and I'm sorry to spring this on you right now, but I can't lie to you, and here's what's up. And it actually, that one time that it did happen, spurred a really awesome conversation. And I tend not to want to put myself in situations where, if I'm going to be discovered, that it's potentially going to be dangerous for me. I stay out of those situations in general. I think a few steps ahead so I don't ever have to go there. But the conversation that I did have was, as I kind of suspected it would be, very insightful and very freeing, and there was a great exchange of information. So I wish that I could record those scenarios, because they're gold, essentially, social gold. But yeah, I don't lie. That's my personal policy. And there are people in my situation that will lie to cover up, and I just don't. I, like you revealed, if the problem that people are going to have later on down the road in discovering the truth will be that they realize that they were actually verbally misled and lied to. And that's where you have every right. And I totally understand, and feeling the way that you would feel, offended that you were deceived. That's not, I keep wanting to say that, but that's not right.
Deceived.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, this is where my brain's having trouble working right now. But otherwise, no, I am careful not to create those situations because of what you just said. I don't want that specifically. So it's a very, very, very fine line.
Yeah, I don't claim to have any recommendations or answers for that. I can imagine myself, I'd probably still be potentially offended, even just because of how carefully you'd avoided telling me anything. Again, I'm not saying whether that's right or not, but it's quite possible
Sure.
that
Yeah,
would be the
it's a
case.
feeling. I get it.
Yeah, so this seems like if we're going to have a segment of of taboo, awkward things, we've kind of already
Yeah,
wandered into it.
perfect segue.
So, and I've got some more of these. So but first of all, you're sure there is no way you'd prefer me to see you? If there's a way to isolate us from the rest of the world, here we are. Let's say we never meet. We're just talking online.
Yep. I would prefer for you to see me as male, as masculine, simply in the respect that I know how evolutionary biology would have you as a biological man treat me as a biological woman. And I got that treatment throughout the first, 30 years of my life. I hated it. I understand that it's there for good reason, and that there are plenty of women who would appreciate that. But for me, it's always felt just patronizing and awkward and disempowering for me, because I'm a much more masculine person. So simply on that, hacking the evolutionary biology system the way that you would maybe just be inclined to treat me, and I think that you might be, because I've talked to other guys who know that I've transitioned, and they tell me, I'm tempted to treat you like a woman, but you don't talk to me like one, you don't act like one. So I'm getting this weird like back and forth, back and forth. And I just tell them, like, as best as you possibly can, just treat me like a guy, because that's how I feel more comfortable. I want you to be completely open about your thoughts, and I want you to, rag on me, and I want you to do all those things, because that's where I feel comfortable. I don't feel like I'm being, patronized, So if that answers your question better.
Yeah, it does. And as usual, I had a thought midway and then I lost it. Oh no, I had a couple thoughts actually. How do you think I? Okay, so you're talking about how you, because I asked you, you're saying how you'd like to be viewed, but then you referred to how you're treated.
Mhm.
Does it matter to you what I think and feel if I act towards you the way you would like?
For me, yes, it does.
I mean,
Because
I would assume so. I'm just saying I
yeah,
don't believe it when you say
yeah.
it wouldn't matter.
I know, because it's so unusual, and I'm finding this to a lot of people that I talk to. When I tell them, and I could look them straight in the eye and be like, please, for the love of God, be honest with me, like as honest as that little voice in you that says, just do it, do it. And then the other part of you is like, no, 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 don't do that. It's social taboo. No, ignore that bitch. I don't want you to listen to that, little angel that says, don't do this because it's, social grace. I want the nitty gritty. Yeah, the real stuff, because for me, that's when I know that I'm not getting any kind of show. I'm not getting anything that's in the way of me getting the real information, the stuff that to me is actually useful, getting to know somebody and being able to have a productive relationship. So let's get it out of the way.
Hmm.
So yeah, but that's me, and I know that that's very unusual for a lot of people, because maybe they don't realize it, but they hide behind a lot of those social graces as a way to kind of protect themselves too, because maybe they lack the confidence, or maybe they don't know themselves well enough. And that is obvious when you start probing or asking questions, and they get kind of standoffish and uncomfortable and very, and maybe some people just want to protect their privacy. I mean, I can understand that, but this it's something that you'll see um, as a more pervasive, across the board with a lot of questions or things. People will just be that way. And it's like, I really can't get anywhere with that. And I find that that's just a lot of people for one reason or another. They just have that.
Sorry, I'm a little bit
But
lost in generalities here. You're saying a lot of people
yeah, I'm sorry. Yeah.
are too polite or about anything, or
Yeah, too polite for one reason or another, either because they have, the social anxiety, they're afraid to say something wrong, or maybe they don't know themselves well enough to be confident in engaging in that, because then they know they might get that back, and they don't, they're not
oh, I
ready for
see.
that kind of
Okay.
openness. So yeah, they hide behind that veil of social niceties or generalities or cliches, or whatever it is. They don't allow that voice in their head that's, and maybe there's good reason for that voice that's talking may be talking from a place that's very unhealthy and very toxic, and they know that, but they don't know how to fix that within
Yeah,
themselves.
well,
So,
that's certainly a problem that I have some sympathy for, which is
sure.
a thought of that. You mentioned Jordan Peterson earlier, and in fact, that's part of how we've met is because of him. Um,
Hmm.
and if I ever got the chance to talk to him, one of the things as in an interview I would like to really focus on is the honesty thing, because to me a problem with like I feel like the idea of being completely honest as as are the right way to be. That makes sense to me. That feels right. I think it always
Hmm.
has.
Hmm.
But I'm also somewhat neurotic and polite. And that's the
Yeah.
battle. So I mean, this show is like I essentially by inviting people, I have their permission to mostly get rid of the neurotic polite part, and
Hmm.
also because there is no normally when I would be having a really direct conversation with someone that I'm trying to avoid, it would also be an argument about something. But that's
Right.
not the nature of the conversation. So then I don't have to worry about the fact that there might be some part of me that's actually trying to be nasty because there
Hmm.
isn't. We're having a nice conversation. But in real
Right.
life, the problem that I would have partly with that is that almost always things are laced with this poisonous. We got to this point where now I'm being honest, but I also want to do it in a nasty way. And
Yeah.
then I don't want to do it because I don't want to be the nasty person. And it's
Right.
just this mess. So I'm actually
Yeah.
hoping doing this will make me better at saying, beating my resentment to the punch or whatever the line is. I forget on the draw,
Sure.
whatever.
Yeah.
By actually getting accustomed to this kind of conversation.
Hmm.
But
Well,
this
and
is
we've
my
also,
therapy. I don't know if I've put that in
and
the. I kind of
but
said
that's
that in my channel intro, but
and that's exactly what I'm hoping to foster, truthfully. To use a terrible, terrible term, I'm creating a safe space for people. We've established that rapport and that trust to be able to create the safe space to have these conversations. And I've realized that um, there are other ways to go about doing that. There's an idea that I have that I'm hoping here in the spring to integrate into my channel, which is a Crowder style change my mind segment, but without setting up that adversarial prime at first, to go out in public spaces where I know there are going to be people who may not be very happy with the transgender, narrative that's going on right now, and rightfully so. Put myself out there with a table to invite people to come talk to me, like a tea time with Artemis, and invite them to say all of those things that they very much want to say, because you can create, and it's not a very fun way to go about it, I realize you can create that safe space and that trust by allowing somebody to come at you and be like, you bleeping, 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 bleeping. I can't believe that, you and your people are doing this and y'all are monsters, and, and just get that off their chest, because I know that they're not actually talking to me. They're talking to all of this, radical agenda that's out there, the boogeyman in the ether that, once they've had a chance to vent that steam at something that they see is the target of their, their venom. And that person says, okay, I understand. Is there anything else that you want to talk about? It will, I mean,
that'd be an amazing show if it worked.
I'm
That-
so looking forward to
Getting
what that,
yelled
and
at.
not, yeah, right. And not in the kind of, patronizing, narcissistic sneer sort of way. Like, is that all you got? Bring it,
Mhm.
and like no, please sit down, have some tea. Let's, talk about this and just watch what happens, because, that it's kind of like that Goodwill Hunting moment. I don't know if you've ever seen that, the movie. It's a very, very famous scene where Robin Williams and Matt Damon. So Robin Williams is a therapist. Matt Damon is this misunderstood, genius youth who has some rage and aggression issues because he's never been properly plugged into what fulfills him. Instead, he's just got a lot of resentment from a crappy childhood. And there's a scene where Robin Williams is coming towards him. And he's saying, "Look, it's okay." And Matt Damon is, no, man, it's not. Quit messing with me. I don't want you. And, pushing him away, violent, 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 until Robin Williams just says, no, really, it's okay. And Matt Damon just breaks down, crying, and all the walls come down. It's supposed to be this, beautiful cinematic moment, this cathartic release. But I can imagine that is how it happens for a lot of people who just do not know how to break down that barrier and have those conversations. It just comes out in a very, child temper tantruming kind of way. And when you sit someone down and just let them do that as an adult, which is something that's so totally supposed to not be okay, they finally have like a breakthrough moment, like, wow, okay, I guess this is okay, this is a safe space. And maybe they can, again, like we were saying earlier, begin to move through those emotions, and get past them to the other side and realize, okay, I guess not all trans people are, insane and out to destroy the fabric of our society. It's I think that's an incredibly important conversation to have. And I'm not necessarily looking forward to being screamed at, having my life threatened on that level, but I don't feel like it would be any kind of, physically dangerous sort of thing. I think it's like a social release valve that needs to happen. There needs to be that so that people can start to process all this and not demonize an entire group of people based on whatever this stupid mainstream media is wanting to push and conquer and divide. So anyway.
I'm really excited about that show. Like, I don't know if there's this term my sister uses, happy bubbles, to describe these. I don't know if it's a lung phenomenon or what it is, but yeah, and
Yeah.
that has the potential. I mean, it could go south, but to go viral.
Oh yeah.
So that's I'll be really interested to see how that goes.
Yeah.
Now, this is the obligation part, I guess. This is something I haven't worked out yet. This is perhaps the obligation part of the podcast, because while you're describing this scenario, I definitely did have what I would identify as, I can tell how I'm categorizing you in part by imagining how I feel about you in that situation. And it's not what you want. But I don't have to mention that, which is why I should. But I'm excited to see you do it. So I mean, that's
Well, but now you got to share with me what those thoughts are, and you can't.
Oh no, I mean, like, I imagine standing behind you. Like, I want to be there.
Oh,
in case it goes wrong.
Yeah.
No, I mean, well,
Like, I mean, that's not that. I mean, I don't necessarily see that as a you protecting me in a feminine kind of way. That's also, I mean, guys do that all the time when they're in groups at the bar. Like, yeah, I got you, bro. Like, wingman. And even though in your mind you're seeing me as, the 120-pound biological female who's not going to be able to ward off anybody much larger than me, that much makes sense. But also on the same token, to me, it might also just indicate that there is some kind of friendship investment there, that you actually give a damn about my safety, which is, endearing, I think. So I don't take it too personally. So
I'll try for the sake of the full admission, though, I can tell by the flavor of it, it would have a different flavor under different circumstances. But this is the thing that I want to make clear. That doesn't mean that I have to act that out just because I feel it. Like, this is
sure.
You
can let me get my ass beat.
I ask you how I'm genuinely interested. I think this is one of the core transgender issues. I guess, how do you want me to see you? How do I see you? What do we do about this? I feel this. So that's why I think it's important to have, and probably a lot of more superficial arguments people have around it. And this is actually one of the more is the real issue. But I would say, like, I want to know what your perspective is, but also I'll keep an eye on my feelings, but they're my business. It's how I interact with you is partly your business. Sure. And under normal circumstances, I wouldn't tell you what I was necessarily feeling, and it wouldn't come up. I would make an effort to act, I'd think, okay, how should I act that will, that was more in accordance with the way you'd like me to, within reason. So I would not tell someone that, because I would think it was counterproductive, unless it was a problem.
And like you said, information that's really not necessary. I don't need to know the inner workings of your mind. And that's something that I've seen a lot of, transgender, the narcissistic transgender, I call them TikTok trans, people who they want to control your feelings and emotions too. And I've heard one of them directly say, you misgendering me consistently tells me that your feelings in your mind, your view of me is betraying, your words. Like they want to go in your mind and completely alter the way that you see them, so that the words that come out your mouth are completely consistent all the time. They want to brainwash you, essentially. And that's horribly alarming and a terrible tyrannical form of control that is kind of pervasive in a lot of other aspects of at least North American culture or United States culture right now. But that's what they want. And I'm telling you that, while I would like you not to have conflicting feelings because I don't want you to suffer per se. Like you said, it's not really any of my business how you're feeling. And I would hope that if you were really getting hung up about something, that you would just say, "Hey, I'm having trouble with this. Is there something you can, help me understand, and maybe I can resolve it on my own?" Like that's really, if it gets to that point, that's really all I would like to know. But I
Mhm.
can't force you to do that, like you said. So
Well, and
yeah,
also I'm aware that it's interesting how I do respond to how I can how I feel changes by taking in more information. That's a very weird generic statement, but what I mean is I could imagine that I would feel differently over time.
yeah,
Like that's
yeah,
that's just and that's also because I've the whole reason way I've come to you and your channel, right? And that I've watched probably almost the few recent ones I think I've missed, but I've watched most of the videos. So like I even get to there's a couple very visual ones that help cement where you came from, so to speak. So yeah, it's yeah. So the point is,
yeah.
it does change. So
And
there
that's
is
a
hope
completely
from
natural
that point of view.
phenomenon. When you come at something that you have no experience with, you have all of your own preconceived notions and thoughts that exist, from your mind, from your creation. And then as you interact with the reality of a situation, or at least the external reality of that, then it will, change and mold as time goes on. So you knowing that I'm a biological female, or having, seen me as such in some of my earlier videos sounding a different way, then certainly your brain is going to, make an amalgamation, and orient the way that you think and feel and speak to me, interact with me based on that. But then, as you said, as time goes on, and you get more information, something that's more consistent with something else over time, then it will change. That's a completely natural phenomenon that happens with everything in life, I think.
Yeah. Okay. I had three good thoughts while you were talking. Let's see if I can remember them all because I think they
Yeah.
start out dismal, but it has a good ending, and
Okay.
it's intriguingly psychological. Yeah. Can
Mm.
I remember? I think I forgot the first one. Yeah. Okay. Okay.
By the
Yes.
way, our snowman.
Yeah. Yeah.
Sorry.
Um, okay, yeah. The first one is that it's not just intellectual. Like I believe whether it is through actual visual or other forms of recognition, or whether it's simply I don't know what all the forms are. I believe I see. I'm going to use some controversial terminology here. I believe I see the woman in you while I talk to you.
Sure. Yeah.
Quite like it's not. I don't have to try to do that. So that's the bad news
Hmm.
from the point of
Yeah.
view of you not wanting me to see things that way.
Sure.
But as I say, I think it can change over time, and the reason I believe that is because I do think I can't remember any specific. I guess it's probably been experience actually. I'll call it research. It's not entirely research, but researching trans stuff.
Yeah.
What I actually believe I would do and want to do is over the course of any sort of interaction or relationships, I learn to see what this is the nature of a relationship to see you, and that's
Mm.
a whole bunch of different things. It's
Mhm.
visual, it's your personality, it's just the way it works together. It's has something to do with a relationship as well. um, so that I could imagine coming to a point where I'm going to use that specific example of you being yelled at by someone on the street.
Mhm.
I could imagine feeling differently about it, quite
Yeah.
possibly. I don't know because I don't know if there's some biological dimension to it that I can't overwrite. But I can imagine in a not at all brainwashy way that it could just change because I'm actually learning whatever you are. I'm learning more about it,
Right.
and and precisely the sort of reason why I'd like to do the kind of show we're doing right now, and what I'm concerned about in part with arguments and superficial dumb explanations for things and so on, is that if you don't allow people to go through the process you're allowing me to do right now,
Mm.
what I would probably do is I'd end up with all sorts of muddled feelings, and then they're clamped down by social awkwardness and
Mhm.
resentment and anger being pushed around, but then also feeling guilt that maybe I should go along with this or whatever. And so I would never get to the hypothetical point where I can actually learn who you are, and we could find a relationship that worked.
Right.
So to me, even though it starts from kind of the transgender nightmare of I think I see the the person they're trying to perhaps get away from in them. I
Mhm.
believe the ultimate place is assuming is that hopefully if we have an honest relationship, I will come to see the same thing you do to some degree. I
Mhm.
mean, it's always different from the inside and the outside, whatever that is. Now, if
Right.
it turns out that if you were truly confused about and decided that your reasons for transition were nonsense or something, maybe I would have also been seeing that. So then it wouldn't the relationship would be kind of clunky or weird as we're trying to figure that out. But
Right.
that's I think that's I don't feel like I'm saying that just because it sounds good. I think that's the hope. Um, so yeah, but
Yeah.
I imagine that it feels to me like I know I'm talking a lot. I'm trying to figure this out, but it feels like that's psychologically the way it would work ideally. You start out with a combination of genuine perceptions, ideas, preconceived notions, and then it moves towards an actual understanding. Now, conceivably, that actual understanding is still not going to be completely perfectly what you'd like it to be, but that is the same with everyone in every relationship. You
Yep.
know, I could
That's the
see
beauty of it.
myself as being on time. It doesn't make me on time or something.
Right. Yep.
Um,
Yep. No, that's the beauty of it. And something that I'd like to add here too that's incredibly important to keep that what you described as the weird, muddling if I was vacillating on my, transgender identity is that if I don't know myself, you can't know me either. And this is a problem that I think a lot of people have, not just transgender people. I think transgender people put it in your face, as a very literal, like, am I, man or woman kind of thing. And that's as a proxy for the bigger concept, which is that I don't think a lot of people really know who they are. They're just a jumbled up mess of childhood baggage and coping mechanisms that they've never really had a chance to actually understand who they are outside of all of those, defense mechanisms and social identities. They're plugged into that, and they just do this. And so for you would actually, aside from having, of course, to have a safe space for you to ask these questions, I could give you a safe space to ask the questions, but if I can't give you definitive answers, I almost said straight answer, and that would have been funny. If I can't give you definitive answers, then you can't get to know me any more than I know myself, which is nothing. So I know a lot of people don't know themselves, and that's something that I learned about myself as I was learning myself. I came across this whole, we talked about this in the first episode. um, I was uncovering all of the childhood baggage and trauma and coping mechanisms and the shell of, what I had put out, this, holographic image of who I was, tearing all that down at the same time, discovering that I this particular um, expression of self, as in transgender, worked very nicely for me. And so I kind of, all those things came together, coalesced kind of at the same time. But I find that a lot of people haven't even gone through those first couple of steps of, dropping the childhood baggage and getting to know themselves after all of that, to even begin to be able to be known by other people. So that's
yeah,
incredibly important.
yeah, I'm pretty sure I have some more figuring out to do, and that goes along with the wood stove and murdering things in the woods, I
Yeah,
suppose.
right. Yeah, sure. It's a process for people, and it's not a quick one. I'll say that. Our brains aren't even developed until well into our 20s. Some people would argue into their mid to late 20s when you finally hit a neurologically mature point where you can begin to really put that framework in to start to figure everything out. And by that point, I mean, you've already had over, what, a quarter of a century of input to have to sort through. That's a bitch of a backlog to have to go through. So
Yeah, I know there's the whole, your brain's developing until 25. I have to say, can't recall ever feeling it. Like that might seem like a silly, but like it's thrown around like it's such an obvious thing. I don't know that I've noticed people suddenly improve after they were 25, or I don't know. I mean, I'll take your word for it, but
it's not that they suddenly improve, it's that they suddenly can and have the framework. There's a big difference that, now you have all, it's kind of like finally having all the tools to do the job
Mhm.
is really how I view it. And there are plenty of people who, have that toolbox, but it's rusty as shit and hasn't been opened ever. So, you know, that's up to the person at that point.
Yeah. Okay. Where does that leave us? Oh, yeah, I guess one thing I wanted to finish off was a couple of my. Hang on, I had three. Oh, yeah, I had an interesting question, I thought. Um, how do I register for you in terms of like masculine, feminine? Since you think, and I want to add to it, like in terms of psychological health, you obviously think a lot about this, but I mean broadly, like in terms of I don't know. I thought here I'm saying all this stuff, and why don't we turn that around as well? And
Turn the magnifying glass around. So where you register on the masculine feminine spectrum is the first
yeah, or
question.
however you think of it. Yeah, like I have my own thoughts I was about to say, and I thought, well, no, I want to see what you think first.
Sure. I would consider you to be another relatively well balanced as far as when it comes to masculine and feminine, because you have the feminine aspect of being the skill of being able to listen, and that's something that I mean, if people can ascribe characteristics to masculine and feminine, they'll get in the weeds thinking, oh, well, then it's, just a biologically male thing or biologically female thing, or, oh, well, can't men and women, have both of these qualities too? It's not like all women are great listeners. It's not that black and white. It's basically just saying that, in general, like there's night and day, and there are certain characteristics like, to night versus day. With the masculine and feminine, there's general characteristics and attributes that are typically associated, with those categories. That it doesn't mean that it's only a man or only a woman trait. I just want to make that clear. I think you understand that, but just for anybody listening, I'm not that chauvinistic or that black and white. But so you have, again, the feminine skill of being able to listen, which is something that masculine, that's not generally their strength. But the masculine aspect of you, the interest, like you said, in some very, physical, go out in the woods and, kill something with your bare hands kind of thing. That's a very masculine trait, that's sort of chaos and destruction sort of thing. So I think you have both of those, to me, at least in what I've seen of you so far, in relatively equal measure. So I see you as a balanced individual, at least on that front.
Do you feel as though in the conversation there's any indication that there is an imbalance that's causing me trouble? And I know the conversation, like I have no idea what it is to like to talk to me. I'm glad I don't know, have to know.
Right.
Although I will probably watch this whole thing over again, so then I'll get some idea. But
Yeah, the only thing that I have seen is again what you've already alluded to, which is your little bit of anxiety in staying in your head too much. You have a lot of a filter there, that neurotic nature, which is something that I think is probably more of a feminine trait, because it's definitely more masculine to be without filter and just straight out the mouth kind of thing, just to be very tactless almost. But I would say if anything's tripping you up, it's maybe that. But again, every trait that somebody has that you might say is not a good thing to have, I mean, there are pros to it as well. I mean, to be able to be quiet and not just immediately shoot the first thing that comes out of your mouth can probably save your butt in a lot of cases. So it is a good thing to have. You just have to know how to balance it, like most things. So
okay, finally the $1 million question.
yeah.
Does it at all seem weird? Like how do I come across as a person that you're talking to? Like, does it feel like sometimes do I at all seem unsettling on account of the potential neuroticism, or do I seem at all dishonest or fidgety?
Right. So
I'm really, I'm, we talked about you and we talked about how I felt about you. Now I want to flip it around
yeah.
because all the
Okay.
sex and gender stuff doesn't have to be about people who have been
Transitioning.
for whatever. Well, and more broadly, like I mean, I was hoping to talk about the acronym LGBTQ, etc. at some point, but anyone
Yeah.
who might be considered to fall into that, they're not the only people who. A lot of the considerations you have to them can apply to other people in different degrees and so on. As you were sort of saying, like they bring a lot of these things to light, but it applies to psychology and so on. So, anyways, I just think it's interesting to say, hey, no, I can. I'm curious to know whether any of these considerations apply to me? Like, am I
Yeah. So
unsettling at all? Is there any aspect of me that's femininely unsettling? Does it jar with?
no, not for me, but I'm also maybe not the best person to ask that because I am unabashedly brazen and kind of stupid in that sense where I don't see danger in a lot of things or unsettling in a lot of things, especially
Mhm.
when I'm in the mode of just being, just throw it at me. I at that point seem to be pretty impervious to those cues because I don't want to be anxious or unsettled. I just want to be completely open and available for the dialogue and shut all of that off. So I could be perceptive of those things, I suppose, if I wanted to, but in general, I don't, which probably contributes to that cavalier feeling and people feeling very comfortable with me because I'm not anywhere in my head going, okay, there's some weird shiftiness going on there, a little bit of anxiety, maybe I should pull back, maybe I should, nope, I'm not, there's none of that going on. So for me, no. I don't think that it's unsettling necessarily. um, I can see how other people might perceive your hesitation or your maybe lack of eye contact sometimes as
Oh,
being
you caught that one. Okay.
oh yeah, no, yeah, but see it doesn't affect me, so you're not going to see that in my interaction with you. I guess I shouldn't say that I'm dumb. I perceive them, I just don't care. So yeah, I get that about you, and I can see how some people would be maybe a little uncomfortable if they're thinking maybe, oh, is it me or oh, is it them, or but you're a little more introverted appearing to me in that respect, less bold, less forward, and more introspective, which I mean, I think that's, you absolutely need that to have that understanding for what you're aiming for with your show, which is to balance what you are with what you think is good to experience on the flip side of that persona, if what I'm saying makes much sense.
Kind of.
Yeah, so you're putting yourself in a scenario that's uncomfortable for you so that you could kind of
Oh,
overcome that. Yeah.
right, right. Yeah. Okay. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
um,
No, no, that all fits with what I was thinking.
and
Um,
people wouldn't believe you that that's what you were really trying to do, and they wouldn't think that it was a genuine thing if you were acting like me, very eye contact and very animated and super bold and just totally putting off that very cavalier masculine thing. They would think you were blowing smoke. I think people can really get into empathizing with you because they're getting all of the body cues. They're getting you know what you right now, I'm talking about you and you're covering your face, that you're
oh,
feeling like
come on.
maybe
I'm
you're
being thoughtful.
but I
There.
mean that's body language that, no, it's that you can either way. I'm just pointing
No,
things
I'm
out
doing it
that,
this way now.
yeah, I pointed it out, made it
Yeah.
awkward. But they're able to put themselves in your shoes very realistically because they can see themselves in you and go along with you in that experience of putting yourself out there to uncover those uncomfortable aspects. So I
Well, that's
think that's
interesting. I hope it does work to my advantage, although I also hope to work on it. So here's my own little indulgent, like mini transgender experience as it
yeah.
relates to that. I think early in life, I was good at some of the feminine social things, and
Mhm.
I capitalized on it. And I don't care whether anyone else thinks that I was good at it. The point was that I thought that it was a strength, and I think it actually stunted the development of my masculine traits to some degree. And also, I tended, I think I mentioned this before, but I might not have. I was homeschooled as well.
Mhm.
And
Yep.
to some degree, I did follow, like, people will say, oh, are you socially isolated? Are you this? Well, I think I've known homeschool people who weren't, but I have tended to know people who are much older than me throughout my life and have a smaller social circle and so on. So that probably didn't help. And,
Mhm.
and so like, my goal in the next year or so, I think if I can pull it off and if it seems physically appropriate, I want to do some martial arts. Like it's almost like a silly thing. Like I would like to do something that's violent, active, competitive, and
Mhm.
preferably masculine. And maybe I'll decide, oh, I don't want to be with these gorillas. But it sounds like it would be something like that would be good. And I am aware of a competitive dimension and a more I just got feedback or something. My speaker said quack. It was weird.
Oh.
Um, anyway, I'm aware of, I think, some of those things, trying to figure out how to express themselves out of my personality and going in weird directions and so on. So I want to come up with some really like stereotypical ones and see if that sorts it out.
Yeah.
But anyway, but what's interesting is that it seems to me, perhaps in my ignorance, it's almost like the reverse of the transgender experience of discovering the opposite in you and then
Yeah.
trying to bring it out. I'm discovering the same thing that I didn't address properly, and so that I'm trying to bring that out instead.
Yeah.
And I specifically expect, I'm concerned about seeming shifty, and possibly just less like plop. I don't know, just let's hear, and I'm hoping that will be changed and improved by that kind of thing. And I'm also just hoping the physical stuff I do too. And since I've got lots of energy, that seems like a good idea. And then the other thing was that I was just thinking of this today, is I'm not sure what to make of the whole non-binary thing. A lot of people aren't. I'm not as against it as some people are, from the point of view that in a way it makes sense to me that someone might not particularly feel connected to a particular sex or behaviors or whatever it is. So that seems reasonable. It's what you do about that feeling that seems where there's more room for debate. I think that someone might feel that way seems reasonable to me. And I was thinking, actually, if I was going to bother trying to describe how I feel, it would be like a masculine non-binary sort of personality. I feel like the ghost of sick when I say that, because it sounds like to be that. It's a kind of navel gazing. It feels like that I don't like. But if I was going to do it, was just struck me. I thought, actually, if we were going to use these labels, those ones might work. I don't think they achieve anything for me. I don't think they say anything fundamental about me. So yeah, I just thought it was kind of interesting. I thought, these considerations aren't just for people who you hear about the more extreme cases. It doesn't mean there isn't a whole spectrum. And actually, I've been learning a lot about that from podcasts about mostly it seems to be female to male transgender or transsexual people who have these podcasts I've been listening to. There may be the other way too, but I haven't found them yet. And they talk about in lesbian culture there being witches and femmes, which I didn't know. I don't know. Do you have any idea how prevalent that is? Like, is that
okay? So there's like 3 or 4 things in what you've been talking about that I would love to touch on.
Okay, well then I'll just finish. I'll just finish that sentence, and then you can go. And that even I forget who it was. I think I should maybe send you some links if you have time to listen to any podcasts, because there've been some interesting ones. But anyways, there's one particular one where I believe they were saying that even before they transitioned, people said he, because that felt that was already in the culture. It was, you're at a party and it's a lesbian party, and they just, I don't know how they tell. Like, you got a buzz cut, I guess I'll call you he. I don't know. That was interesting to me, that there was dysphoria or gender identity or whatever word you want to use for it already, and it is not just already, that there been a significant, perhaps, number of people, significant given the slice of the population, who were dealing with that, but it wasn't extreme enough, or they, for whatever reason, weren't inclined to do medical things about it. Which is interesting. And so likewise, I just thought, hey, I want to get on this. I guess if I really wanted to, I could. So
So, oh God, it's really good stuff. Let's go back real quick to the whole martial arts thing. That's actually something that I want very much to do myself, but it has less to do with the, physical outlet, which is still something that I do feel like I need, because in general, in order to be motivated, I do find myself needing to physically manipulate, whether that's clean or build or, rearrange, whatever it is. Like, I need to periodically purge that from my system to feel better. And martial arts is one way to do that. But also something else that I've heard martial art instructors talk about.
Can I guess? Has to do with body integration. No? Okay. I want it to be clever. Go ahead.
But kind of, in a way. And I'm sure that could be a whole nother aspect too. But it's also on a subconscious level, if you do not know, if you don't know how to defend yourself, if you feel defenseless, then that will permeate other aspects of your character. So if you feel comfortable enough to defend yourself, not that you want to go around bullying people, but if you feel competent in a situation that would be threatening to you, your entire demeanor changes generally day to day. It really does help, people have said, with their anxiety level. And that's probably why a lot of women very much enjoy doing self-defense courses, because it does give them a sense of empowerment, where I certainly think they need to have. But it would help them feel better, certainly. But so to touch on that bit about martial arts, it's good for a number of reasons. I think a lot of people should entertain it, if for no other aspect other than to feel competent in being able to defend themselves if necessary. To touch then on going forward with the non-binary. So I'm going to try to unpack this as quickly as I can. It's kind of a big thing, but I've had a bone to pick with the term non-binary, because it literally means, not system of two, which in my opinion, and maybe this is more than opinion, maybe this is quite literally fact. Yeah. When it comes to humans anyway, you are either male or female, and that's, or people could say, oh, what about intersex? It's still a combination of a system of two. That's kind of the root, is a system of two. And we do have a binary system when it comes to sex and gender. It's just based on two. There's a huge spectrum that can be expressed in between those 2 points. And like, binary computer code, a system of 0 and 1, it's, you can write code to do anything using just 2 numbers. It's still a system of 2. So our sex system, our gender system is still based on 2. And so when they say non-binary, it makes no sense to me, because even people who say, I don't feel like man or woman, well, you look like and are expressing either, mentally or physically somewhere along that spectrum. So you are indeed part of a binary system. You are just more what I would say is gender fluid, which is, it sounds gross if you think about it, but that's probably a better way to describe what these people are. Their gender expression is just fluid. It's kind of somewhere, in along that spectrum. Now, I could say for myself that I don't feel, either man or woman. My feelings are not facts, and they don't dictate, objective reality. And so, like you said, I'm kind of more of a hybrid of sorts, but non-binary still would not be, what I would say to describe me, because I still exist on this plane as somewhere between those 2 points. So again, non-binary, not a fan. And no, male, ma'am, or sir don't really fit me, because pronouns are really meant to indicate biological sex. And that's really, I'm actually getting ready to do a video about the history of pronoun usage, why we started using it. And it actually goes back quite a long way, that people have been experimenting with, sie, zim, zer, and other pronoun types go back actually into the 19th and 18th century. We've been having this conversation for that long. But again, it's not really ever been meant to refer to somebody's feelings, like I feel or don't feel very man or woman. The honest reality, if you want to call it reality, that a lot of people would tell you is that, well, I really don't feel man or woman. Feelings are not generally reflective of our biological reality. Feelings are kind of an amorphous thing. So a lot of people don't really feel man or woman. If we're being honest with ourselves, it's a conversation that we don't have. And like you were saying, there's probably a lot of people that don't really feel a strong, identity or pull towards their natal sex or their genitalia. I don't really identify with those things personally. They don't define me as a person. So if you really want to get nitty gritty about it, there's probably a lot of people that don't feel like man or woman. But that's okay. I just don't want to, I wouldn't call it non-binary, because I'm a stickler about words, and that's not really the right word in my opinion. But your experience that you're talking about is, male non-binary. That's actually a pretty common experience for a lot of people. We just haven't really been having those conversations. And like you said, the transgender or the non-binary, that just makes it more obvious in the social sphere for people, kind of like a figurehead under which we can begin to have these conversations.
Well, that would
But
be nice if that's how it operated, not a
if
figurehead under which we have these battles and
right.
um,
But about the butch and the femme lesbian
I'm
dynamics.
impressed how
So
you've actually remembered all of the points that
I've been trying really, really
my
hard.
brain's been useless at that this evening, but to
Yeah,
me
I'm
at least.
surprising myself actually being able to recall that. But to the okay, so the butch and the femme, that's that is a culture that's been around for a very long time. And it is so yeah, pretty typical that you would have what you would call a butch or a dyke, a female lesbian who is presenting in a very masculine way, and that's short haircut, men's clothes. Maybe they'll bind their breasts, all of those things, and there is this kind of masculine feminine interplay. When they prefer to be in relationship with feminine women. That's not always the case. You do get butch on butch, dyke on dyke. That does, femme on femme. That is a thing. It's less common, but that is a thing. And those butch women have, like you said, maybe always had that kind of, some of them, not all of them. I shouldn't speak for all of them because I can't. But as from what I understand, actually, there's this book. I'm going to pull it up here real quick. It's just about impossible to get a copy of this thing, and when you find it, it's insanely expensive. I was so lucky to have found it. It's called the Persistent Desire, and it has a lot of anecdotal stories about that very thing. It says a femme butch reader, and it talks about people's experiences within those kinds of relationship dynamics and that sort of culture within the lesbian community. And it's
May I
really
just
pretty
say it's
fascinating.
great that there is this lesbian book that's hard to come by and it's expensive. That just fits.
Right. So it is it's incredibly priceless peek into that culture. But in any case, like you said, it's entirely possible that this sort of dysphoria and this sort of question has been around the butch expression for a long time now. And not all butch women feel the need to, or would have felt the need to remove their breasts, or would have liked to take testosterone and really appear that much more masculine. Some of them very much enjoy still being women and don't have that dysphoria. But yes, to answer your question, it's something that's been going on for a long time. And I think now that we have this affirmative, this culture of affirmation among therapists and the medical community of, okay, if you say you're transgender, then let's go ahead and make that happen, which let me say, as if I didn't say it a ton on my channel, I don't agree with this whole culture of affirmation. It's an absolute goddamn disaster. But that sort of thing wasn't really around for the vast majority of the whole butch cultural existence, the expression. So now that it is, you might see a lot of them maybe now transitioning more late in their life because they're like, oh yes, okay, it's something that I can actually get. This is a thing and it would improve my life, and that's great. So there is that little bit of release for some of them, but it's not necessarily for all of them. That might be all I wanted to say on that topic, but I would appreciate more of your input, so that if there's anything else that we can talk about.
More specifically, though, too, what I'm wondering is if you have any idea how widespread that butch femme phenomenon is. Like, is it just something some women, a way they think of themselves, or is it like you can go to parties and either they're going to say that they consider themselves to be one or the other, or it's obvious, or I would
Yeah, I
assume there'd be
mean,
a spectrum, but you don't know.
yeah, there is a spectrum with everything. So within lesbians, they don't certainly like the what they call lipstick lesbians, feminine women who like other feminine women. You certainly, to look at them on the street, wouldn't know that they were interested in other women or even what other type of women they were interested in. There's a huge spectrum in there. And as a lesbian, you don't have to, dress in Timberland boots and, buffalo plaid and have short haircut, whatever. It's a stereotype because it's common, as a butch lesbian, you're going to maybe dress more masculine. That's how they feel more comfortable in their gender expression, but it's I wouldn't say that it's any more common than any other stereotype that exists, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it was just interesting to me that in some ways it flies in the face of my perceptions that have been filtered through political correctness, kind of I'd read some annoying comment on the internet somewhere about relaying some exchange where where someone asked some woman, whether something like, are you the man or the woman in the relationship? And there she was saying this was, obnoxious and all this stuff. And now, wait a minute, you mean there's a whole subset of lesbians that basically think entirely in terms of who's the man and who's the woman in the relationship after all? Does that mean that was just nonsense? I actually thought it was a valid complaint, but maybe not.
Yeah.
So I just started to wonder how much, what other things are sort of part of popular understanding that are there because they sound fair, but they're not actually accurate. And so I was just thinking, wouldn't it be interesting if statistically most women who consider themselves lesbians also fell on the divide one way or the other, And then the other interesting thing is, I've done no research, I've heard one or two statements from gay men saying that there isn't and from lesbian women too, that there isn't a gay male equivalent so much. Like that there isn't the culture of masculine and feminine gay men. That there's just, in fact, what this particular guy was saying, he said, that basically we're all kind of feminine guys, and we just try to go to the gym and act tough because that's what the other guys want.
But even, I'm not a gay guy, but I think I have to argue with that point, actually, because I feel like there's a spectrum in every person in every sector, because even with gay men, you have the stereotypically effeminate, man, but then, there are like bears, for example, gay men who are not shaven. They're very, very rough. They look like, big hulking, lumberjack men or guys who are overweight or whatever. And they call them bears because they're like grizzly bears, essentially. And sometimes bears like other bears, which is, I would consider that to be like butch on butch, and it's, to me, that's masculine. That's a very masculine expression within a still homosexual man, as opposed to the very effeminate, clean cut, everything's perfect, and he speaks a very certain way kind of man. That there is that feminine to masculine expression even within gay men. So I'm not sure where he was getting at with that.
No, exactly. I have nothing to say like that. I agree, and it makes more sense too. I just the point that I think is worth something is that it's interesting to me the fact that it could be asymmetrical. Like things don't have to be fair. Like there can, because you're talking about men and women, and there might be overall ways that they do things that are different, which to me is part of the fun of life. It's not it doesn't offend my sense of fairness too much.
Decided to grab myself a little snack real quick. Why not?
What do you think about doing a drunken philosothon sometime?
I was kind of hoping you would ask me that, actually, because I was like this close to being like, hey, Julian, what do you think about me having a little drink before the episode? But I was like, no, let's just go with it this time and talk about it later. But yeah, because I have no idea how that would turn out exactly. I don't know if it would impair my cognitive function or if it would cause me to philosophize ever more brilliantly. But it's something we can certainly experiment with, and if it doesn't turn out very well for either of our images, then we can just tank it.
Yeah, exactly. That would be definitely the rule. I was just imagining this the other day, and that's got to be. The other thing is, although I generally edit as little as possible,
right?
You can just edit more if someone's really bad.
Right. This episode brought to you by Jose Cuervo. Please excuse the edits. No, but for real, one of my favorite shows ever is Drunk History. I don't know if you've seen. Oh my goodness, it's a series by a guy who does like reenactments Okay, so he gets somebody to get drunk, very, very, very drunk, and then retell portions of history. And then as the person is talking, it's like they're narrating the speaking parts of somebody acting out the history. And they act out all of the like the burps and the I forget what I'm saying. And it's like a weird intrusion of reality into the
Right.
historical context. It's absolutely hilarious. I love the entire series. So I thought, you know what, that might actually be kind of fun to do in kind of a, maybe a little more professional of a way. But yeah.
I think there are a lot of interesting kinds of podcasts that could be made, and of course, I don't know how many are out there already, and I just don't know about them. But I've been
Mhm.
really trying to think of it. We talked about ways to spice up our shows, and I want to make it. To me, if I can combine the intensity and honesty of what you're talking about doing in the spring, or
Mhm.
what I'm trying for, maybe succeeded in earlier in the conversation to some degree, combine that
Mhm.
with something goofy. Like I wanted to do, Game of Thrones. Haven't watched it, but Game of Thrones at all?
I do. Yes, I
Okay.
haven't watched it, but I know it.
Do
Yeah.
you know who Peter Dinklage is?
Yes, I do.
Okay. So I've had this idea. When I was doing preliminary research trying to find people to talk to. I looked for people with dwarfism because I thought this would be a good thing to
Yeah.
do.
Mhm.
And one of the things that I've always had in my mind is a show, Baking with Peter Dinklage. Doesn't have to be baking. Maybe he doesn't want to do baking, but like it's combining something fun. It's providing. It's also
Yeah.
a practical way of interacting with someone. It's not just talking about it, which is a little bit too related to arguing. Not that it is
Mhm.
arguing, but I mean, like, there's talking and then there's actual life in some
Yeah.
ways. Um,
Yeah.
and so the idea of actually doing something practical, or going camping, or going hunting, whatever, that has some
Yeah.
appeal. But so I've always had this idea of it would be more entertaining.
Yeah, for sure.
So let's say 30. Okay, we got 30 minutes then.
All right, cool.
Talk fast. Yeah. So what's this evolutionary biology stuff?
Yeah, we're gonna jam a massive field of study into the last 30 minutes of the podcast. Yeah, was there anything you wanted to start off by saying in that vein, or do you
Well,
want me to just?
I slightly incorrectly represented my position. I said I had ideas about that. I don't have ideas about that. I'm just accustomed to attempting to think in evolutionary terms. So it's not like it's all alien um, territory. I have listened to your maybe second last, third last, I don't know, episode about Big Tao, men going their
Yeah.
own way, and radical feminism and so on. And
Mhm.
I'm not sure if I'm not listening well or if it's just already familiar territory, because I struggle to summarize what it was about.
Mhm.
And I mean, maybe it's the way you put it together, but I don't know. I think it may just be me or what I'm familiar with. But the point is, it's all familiar territory. What you say, it's not radical
Yeah.
perspective. So that's all I meant. Really, is just that I should be able to. I won't fall off my chair and not know what you're talking about or something.
Well, I mean, I recognize too that it's possible that what I was aiming to communicate wasn't, laser focused on a certain thing, that it was rather what I try often to do in my videos, which is bring together some, really far apart concepts and smash them together into something cohesive, in a bigger picture understanding of things, which gets to be kind of tricky and difficult, certainly. And I'm not always happy with how I communicate it, but I do the best I can to put it out there, and I hope that people get the idea. But in general, it was the title was really getting at what I was trying to communicate, which I think it said something to the effect of when evolutionary biology fails, when evolutionary biology and conscious awareness fail to cooperate. And really, if I were to distill that down to a nutshell, it would be the fact that people seem not to give any kind of weight, or they don't seem to have understanding of how their behavior is being driven on a very primitive fundamental level based on your genetics. It's all about survival and sex and reproduction and all of those things. And we are failing to consciously integrate that into how that fits into the social context of today, which is, at least in first world countries, where we are not it's not about survival anymore. We have all the resources we need, like we talked about here in the very beginning of this discussion. That now all of what our biology is telling us to do isn't necessarily the best way to marry the primitive with technology. In this new abundant age of technology, and we take our feelings as being an indicator of reality or the truth, and it gets us into trouble. So in the sense of like MGTOW and New Age feminism, I was tying in those movements. I feel like we're seeing those now because you have men being shamed for their sex drive, and women saying it's all about empowerment. I should be able to dress as I please with no consequence, and certainly no empathy or understanding for you ogling at my form, as a male who is, programmed to do so. And so this New Age feminism is just demonizing men for those things, and at the same time wanting freedoms which don't really jive super well with their own biological drives. And they're finding that clash, that what Peterson talks about. Here you are 35 and you're a career woman, and now all of a sudden you want kids, and you're not as interesting to men anymore because you are at a certain level of education and expectation that is no longer appealing to a good chunk of men. And nobody's willing to talk about that very honestly, or even try to come up with solutions for that. So then you have MGTOW, which says, okay, fine, screw all of you. We don't need you. Maybe we'll use you for sex, but other than that, we're going to go our own way. And it seems to me that each of these groups are just reservoirs for resentment rather than trying to empathize and understand each other. They're just demonizing one another for the social manifestation of all of their core biological primal instincts. And that to me seems like a shame, really. So I feel like MGTOW and feminism could be fantastic groups for people of each of those gender expressions or each of those sexes to be able to come into a healthy expression of masculinity or femininity. And or like MGTOW men going their own way. Maybe there are plenty of men out there who don't want to reproduce, who don't want to be the fathers, don't want to be providers in that way. And that's totally fine. We need a group that can support men who want to go that direction, who want to go their own way, want to kind of buck the whole primal biology, the drive, the instincts, and support them in that way. And as far as feminism goes, that could be a place where it can serve two purposes. It could be, okay, we're going to celebrate, femininity, traditional femininity, women who want to be mothers, who want to be nurturers, and, that play that familial role. But it can also be a group that supports women who don't want to reproduce and don't necessarily fit the traditional nurturing mother role. Basically, each of these groups, and I failed to say this for MGTOW, each of these groups could provide for support of the entire range of roles within each sex, and acceptance for that, and not just the you're supposed to have kids and you're supposed to be these particular roles, if that makes any sense, because we don't need to do that this day and age anymore. It's not about survival. It's not have 15 kids on the farm because only half of them are gonna, or less than half of them are gonna survive, and we need every single one of them to help and help around the place. And so we're moving into this new age, and we need new understandings for the different gender expressions, the different roles that each sex can have, both within the biological drive to reproduce and also in the other ways in which they can provide to society. So that was a big mouthful, but that's what I was trying to communicate in that video.
Well, I mean, and that sounds, first of all, I want to confess and express massive ignorance in terms of the content of either of those. Whatever is included by the titles, what did you say, New Age feminism and MGTOW, because of course it's not like there's a club and you can join. It's forums. It's all
Right.
anyone can say whatever. My impression, though, well, I I would what you say makes sense to me. My impression, though, at least as far as the MGTOW side of it, it seems to be men who feel that they've been burned by women who treated them in a, I don't know the best words, but these come to mind, like a stereotypically bad female way,
Yeah.
which isn't means that if that's what is some of the, is the central part of affiliation, if that's what they're all moving around, then
Right.
that's not really in line with helping effeminate men find a place in the world or
Exactly.
whatever
Right.
else. And I don't, it seems to me that it would be more like you want to make support groups for people who are a pathological version of their stereotype.
Right.
Um, so yeah, I'm not quite sure how those ideas connect. Like, to me, that's, I don't know whether it would be fair to level that accusation. It's not really an accusation, but at what you're calling New Age feminism. I mean, I agree
Mhm.
that from back here, not really paying close attention, my impression, certainly that's part of the stereotype, right, of an aspect of feminism, is that is
Mhm.
the man hating side of it. But
Right.
if you assume that both are responding to the sorts of mistreatment they talk about, they're it's, were they mistreated or not is one question. And then I guess, if I recall your video correctly, more what you're trying to address too, though, is that people are generally biologically motivated or
Mhm.
pulled towards that kind of bad behavior and that
Mhm.
kind of misunderstanding. It's not to say
Mhm.
that they do it, but so even the good version is still has some of that in it, so that there is more of a male focus on, as you said, I didn't use these exact words, but sex first and ask questions later. Um,
Right.
and
Yeah.
then, well, and I was muddy. This is something like a critique, which wasn't my plan, but let's go with it. About
Mhm.
the, from the female side of it, the idea of like again, the stereotype is a woman who uses up a guy's resources and then leaves him anyways as soon as a guy who's more impressive comes by or something.
Mhm. Mhm.
I'm not sure what you do about that in this, in like what does
So
evolutionary biology have to say about that?
yeah, so that, I mean, that actually is pretty much what humans okay, so I'll try to distill this down in a nutshell again. So from evolutionary biology terms, so you have populations of a species that are either sexually dimorphic, um, or they're okay. Sexual dimorphism, we'll just start here, is when males and females of a population look very different. You can tell that they are different from a distance. And generally speaking, populations of animals who are sexually dimorphic, the males are, bigger and the females are going to be smaller. And in those societies, the males are more aggressive. They tend not to participate in the raising of the offspring. They're more of a lone wolf kind of, wandering persona, whereas the females are more communal and they'll, come together to raise the children because the men are not present, and there's not this, male female integration into a culture. And so as far as humans go, you actually have that whole range. You have, men who definitely look very, very different from the average woman. And then you have men and women who you might not be able to tell too much apart because they look fairly similar in certain populations in the world. So what you can say about the human population is that you're going to have a mix of that, men who are just interested in the hump and dump, and then men who are potentially more, feminine in nature, who are interested in helping raising of the offspring. And so it's impossible to say, in general, what the trends are, because you're going to have a mix of all of that. Now, evolutionary biology will tell you that in the non-monogamous groups, so that would apply to populations where there's sexual dimorphism, where you have or males and females that look very different, they're not going to be monogamous. But like penguins, for example, if they're monogamous, it's because they look a lot alike. They'll pair bond together and they'll stay together. So humans, again, extrapolating from that lens, you'll have the full range of some that are going to be very much monogamous and some that are not going to be. And so the women who are wanting to use men as cart horses and wallets are doing precisely what their biology tells them to do. And through our societal lens, that's viewed as nasty. That's viewed as not very altruistic, not very cooperational, and not very conducive to a cohesive, family unit, a sense of community. But they're doing precisely what their biology tells them to do. But MGTOW will say all women are like this because they've had that experience with a number of women where they just got used and abused by a woman who's simply operating under her, natural biological tendencies. The solution, I think, to that is, again, to educate. And I say again, because I say this in the video, it's to educate people that this is your biological underpinning. This is what's happening here. And this is how it's hurting people on a conscious awareness level here. No guy wants to be used for his wallet all like that. And no woman wants to be used like I was going to say something really vulgar there.
I think I heard it in my head, oddly enough.
Yeah, right. No, so it goes both ways. And that's where each group is failing to empathize with the other. Like, okay, yeah, these are things that we're kind of being driven by our biology to do. It doesn't make it acceptable, but it begins to have the conversation of this is what we're driven to do. But we need to find conscious awareness ways to work with this so that these groups are not pointing the finger at one another going, you're a monster, no, you're a monster. And, and we get absolutely nowhere. Yes, all these things are happening to people, and men are getting burnt and women are getting used. But to sit there and cry victim and scream at the other one doesn't get us anywhere. So just educating people on what's happening here and having some empathy, for crying out loud, is really the only way. And this is people just sorting through their baggage. That's the only way that it's going to happen. More therapy. And we've already got a tremendous shortage of qualified professionals to do that. So I don't expect this to be fixed. It's just this is how we can go about it on whatever scale is possible.
Yeah, well, I definitely don't feel qualified to contribute a lot here. However, what does occur to me is that to me, it seems like it's the mismanagement of those drives, perhaps.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Like and that's actually the mistake. All I have to go on, really, other than some anecdotal experience and my own feelings and so on, is things, just comments I've read sometimes on YouTube, and the name of the person is MGTOW's the way or something, so you kind of get a hint what they're about, and right. It seems to be precisely taking the idea of evolutionary biology, and perhaps a simplistic one, I don't want to say because I don't know what I'm talking about, but anyway, and assuming that that's what all women are and that's what they're about. But even if that was true, it's leaving out there being a person, a consciousness, a thinking, ethical person on top of that to do something. So it's saying they're just those things. I don't know if that's the same thing.
Yeah.
In your new age feminism camp or not, but that seems to me, and I've met one or two men who did seem to have more of that view that that's what women are like. And the big thing that's missing is, well, even if they were somewhat motivated that way, I mean, I have all sorts of motivations. Doesn't mean I'm acting on them. I'm definitely not, possibly to a fault, actually. So that seems to be what's missing. And that maybe, but because I approach my channel from the point of view of a therapist or therapy or something, it sounds to me like, as you're saying, I think, kind of, it's in talking more about and admitting those various drives that actually will allow people to manage them more effectively. Although I still wonder whether it's a very common, do you think it actually is like a personality type of woman who will use men one after the other? Like, wouldn't they want to have a family and then leave?
Yeah.
Or so, in evolutionary terms, purely, I'm not.
Yeah. So yeah, I mean, basically, it would be to have the child and then leave after that point, certainly. But then, at least United States law is very unfriendly to men in a lot of cases, in the sense that, and I say unfriendly, that's probably not a good judgment. I can see getting in trouble for that one, that men will then be held responsible for, things like alimony and, childcare payments and things like that, which I certainly, to an extent, I believe that that's should happen. That there needs to be some form of responsibility taken for that. The woman has just as much responsibility, though, in having slept with that guy. It goes both ways, but yeah, women they know that the legal system is such that they can leave that guy with the kid and then have the financial resources, if they choose well enough, to be taken care of in that way, if that's all that they wanted. Now, there is each of these boogeymen that I talk about, men and women demonizing the other for, the guy that just wants sex and the woman who just wants, money. They're boogeymen, but they, just like any stereotype, they exist because there's a real person behind that. But just as much as there is a real person who maybe is a majority of that persona, each person to some degree has a little bit of that within them, that if they're not careful, will just take over. And that's like, the analogy that Peterson has somehow given, or Peterson has sometimes given in, the whole, I don't want YouTube to boot us about Germany and World War II, those particular people that committed all those atrocities. Every single one of us has the potential to have been in those same shoes and have done those same things, given that scenario. And that's something that we all have to be consciously monitoring, because we will follow, programs at the end of the day that ensure our survival. And again, that doesn't integrate very nicely into society or culture on that conscious awareness aspect of what people consider nice. But that's why we have to be aware of it, that it's not just a boogeyman, it's something that as a persona could exist as a whole person, but also in little bits exist in all of us too. So
Yeah, I think part of my lack of being able to contribute to such a conversation at the moment is I don't have a good understanding of, surprise, surprise, this feminine persona that you're describing. Whereas, to some degree, like, I understand wanting to have sex with a bunch of women. That makes sense to me.
Sure. Yeah.
But it's harder for me to understand. Is there, for example, and I want to make it quite clear, I'm entirely speculating, what's it like to be attracted to, and if this sounds stereotypical, I'm going off stereotypes at the moment. What's it like to be attracted to competence or wealth, or, like, I've known, and it's not an uncommon comment, I would say, among women to like men in a uniform, which typically implies success, competence, and so on. And that's not, I don't find that in my psychology as I sit here thinking. I could come up with with something I thought was kind of analogous, but it doesn't map directly. So the point being that maybe needs to be a conversation, is what is it like to feel, if that really is a thing, what's it like to feel pulled towards someone, even though you thought committed to this person a moment ago, to feel pulled. I know what would feel like to be attracted to more than one woman at a time or something like that. That does not seem hard to imagine at all. But I don't know if I've got it right. Maybe there's a feminine sort of version, and I have no understanding of it. So and maybe few people talk about it or do. So maybe that would be, and they would be interesting, actually. I should have a running list of questions to ask my guests. Doesn't matter what I'm talking to them about. I could be talking to, a doctor about doctor things. And by the way, seeing as you seem to be a woman, can I ask you some woman questions?
Yeah, on this topic, I would like your input.
I did have something which I would like to work on, and I don't know if we have time now, but I wanted to bring up the idea, is I did start what I was calling the Rainbow Questionnaire, and it was going to be something where anyone who considered themselves to be describable by the LGBT, etc. acronym and I
Mhm.
talk about that weirdly because I don't know what exactly to make of it. As a
Mhm.
again, I'm not sure how it's not as defined a category as it seems to be, and it throws together a bunch of people who don't necessarily have a lot of in common or same interests or
Right.
anything else.
Yeah. Right.
But I wanted to have a questionnaire that I could present to willing participants who could
Mhm.
then just to see. So I'm open now or in the future to suggestions for what could go on that. But
Mhm.
things like, um, does it even make sense to have an acronym? What is the common? What do these groups have in common? Are there
Yeah.
groups in that case? Are there
Yeah.
communities? Are you
Hmm.
part of a
Yeah.
community? Are you plugged into
Yeah.
the
It's
LGBT hive mind? I don't
right.
think so.
No, no, and it's a great question because it's something that you hear a little bit of discussion out there about people who are lesbian, gay, bisexual, who are trying to drop the T part of the acronym, the transgender, which I actually, if you want to go based on just what those people have in common being within that group, I would agree that transgender doesn't deserve to be in that grouping, simply on the basis that lesbian, gay, bisexual refers to sexuality and transgender is not. Transgender is an identity that has to do with your gender. That has nothing to do with lesbian, gay, or bisexual. So in general, if you just want to classify sexualities, then you could say, it should be LGB and then perhaps Q, queer
I
people
think
who
Q
are,
covers everything. Why can't we just shorten the
yeah.
whole thing to Q? It seems to.
And that, yep, and that I can agree with you actually on that, just about 100%. I think I haven't put any more thought into it. That's why I'm not saying 100%, but I think I'm leaning that direction. So yeah, it's gotten kind of ridiculous, honestly. And I mean, at first it was just meant to, I believe, just kind of bring attention to a group of minority people who were, as far as sexuality was concerned, minority, and bring them together for a little bit of morale boost, I guess, because it was something that was, denigrated for quite some time. But now it's become something entirely different, and like you said, might be due for a review. So
Yeah, I don't know. I think of it as perhaps the common elements, and this is from my perspective now. I don't know what it was like when it first became popular, but would be as you say, like moral support or morale, and also for activism purposes. And perhaps what's partly in common is supposed to be the feeling of being outside of things, rejected, and so on. But
right.
but I don't think that's a strong enough basis to form a category on. Yeah,
Yeah,
and
maybe
then
not.
I've seen this. Maybe it's once. I don't want to make the mistake of criticizing something which I saw once online as if it's a real thing, just because somebody had the idea. But I feel like there's something to the spirit of the thing, where they added an A. It didn't mean asexual. It meant ally. And I think that at that point you've totally lost the plot. I've also
Yep,
seen
yep.
black put in there, and so what it becomes is the good people. It's everybody. It's everyone who isn't a bad person.
Oh my God.
And
Yeah,
I
yeah,
actually
like you
feel
said.
like that is an undercurrent. Like it's a muddy enough category that that's a major current in it.
Yeah. Mhm.
Is that it's either the good people or that it's expanding to include anyone. What about homeschooled people who felt out of like they were mistreated? Like,
Right. Yeah.
that's a
Yeah.
whole other thing. Is it's not like I feel included in the world entirely. um,
Yeah. Yeah.
but anyway, yeah, that's with 5 minutes or 3-4 minutes to go. I'm not going to bring up that whole thing, but
Yeah. Oh, is that all we got left?
that's
Goodness.
well,
Gee.
yeah. I think to save, yeah, just leave a bit of a cushion. But
Yeah. Sure.
yeah, yeah, kind of a weird ending. This is where people would edit a bit earlier that made a better ending. But
Yeah. Right.
this is what happens when you have some notes and not an unknown amount of brain power for the evening.
Yeah, no, that's okay. I think it's all been fantastic. I'm quite happy with it. I hope you are too.
Well, my feeling is that two things. One, yes, and two, I'm not too concerned with kind of weak endings because I figure the longer people last, the more they're hopefully on the same page and they put up with me this far. They're gonna they can stand the last few minutes. Um,
Yeah, right. Yep, I agree.
yeah. Any
Cool.
I don't know. Any final thoughts? Is there anything you think would be maybe we should touch on in the future. I think this is fun.
Oh yeah.
Again, you don't have to bring it up now. I just thought it might be interesting to people to hear some of the things we're thinking of, and I do want to, if you have any ideas. I meant if anything jumps out of off the top of your head. I don't mean.
Yeah, honestly, nothing without some probing, nothing sticking out to me as, you know, oh yeah, you got to say that. Yeah. No, I think I'm looking forward to potentially putting the spin on this with either memes or alcohol or both. And I think who knows, maybe there will be some things that, you know, with my project I'm trying to work on here for the spring that you might actually in some way be able to also, you know, interact with on your end. I don't know how yet, but that could be pretty cool too. We can maybe do something in that way. Yeah, I would like to bring more people in. If I can find people also, or if you can find people like we did with Daisy, that was pretty great. I do think that more brains are better.
Yeah. One thing too I'm struggling with is that I don't want my channel, this sounds bad, to be dominated with sex-related content. That was one of my interests. It's an area where I think as a society we're not getting it right. Not that I know, but I can tell we got some things wrong, even if I don't know what right looks like.
But it ain't us.
Yeah, but yeah. So, but especially with regards to being, no, my brain can't add to that too much. But anyways, yeah, yeah. So I don't want. That's my only trick. Is I've got a whole bunch of people in the wings, not a whole bunch, but like 3 to 5 that I could either have talked to over the summer or I could bring in. But it could be great, but it's also kind of more of the same in the sense that I don't want other people to come to my channel and think this is my only subject, because I want to talk about all kinds of things. So, but then it means I have to up my production on everything, which hasn't happened.
Well, and I there's another channel that I'm toying with setting up called Musings with Artemis, where I talk about things other than sex and gender, because I know people come to my channel for Tea Time with Artemis based on my introduction that they're looking for the sex and gender and transgender topic. But there are other things that I have already started writing ideas down for that are not related to that. And so perhaps that's something that we could do, you know, as a collaboration, and it could just be unique in the sense that obviously my perspective is going to be very different from your perspective. And that could just be the spin that it's, you know.
Yeah, it doesn't even have to come up. That's a good point. Okay. He's telling me. Okay. Yeah, I had a lot of fun as always. You did not owe me any of this, as far as I know. Maybe you can, so I'm quite grateful and appreciative. And yeah, I wasn't sure how it would turn out. I didn't feel like it as much as I thought, but I actually enjoyed it a lot. So. Yeah,
me too. No, I'm very glad to be here for that, and I enjoy it immensely, and appreciate your candor and your just the interaction in general, in all aspects of it. Perhaps next time we can get real uncomfortable with more taboos and just hit the taboos the whole
I'm not against maybe look in the next couple of weeks just doing a half-hour 15-minute just segment just for that, and then I'll stick it up. That would be a good idea, actually.
Yeah, that sounds good. A taboo teaser. How about that?
That's an interesting idea. Yeah. Okay. Cool. I've already lost a thought that was in my head, but that's fine. Okay. So I hope everyone enjoyed it, and see you later.
Good night.
Good night.